Chapter 384. The status and cultivation potential of the barbarian tribe depended on their totems. The higher the level of the totem, the greater the power and talent of the totem. For example, Wu Sang was able to become a team leader because his totem was the elite demon scorpion totem. When the Saint of Xueling released his own totem, Yi Guchun could clearly feel the difference brought by the different levels of totems. A totem with a bloody and evil aura was released from the saint's body. The totem looked like a crouching centipede, but it was blood-red and looked quite scary. This was the reason why Xueling was able to become the saint of the blood barbarian tribe. The supreme totem, thousand-legged blood centipede. When the supreme totem was released, Yi Guchun clearly felt that the aura of Saint of Xueling's whole body had increased by a large margin. It was as if Yi Guchun had performed the soul-devouring secret skill. And this thousand-legged blood centipede totem was obviously much more powerful than Wu Sang's demon scorpion totem. There was only one level difference between the elite and the supreme totem, but there was a huge difference in their attributes and abilities. Otherwise, there would not be such a big difference between the saint and the saintess and the totem warriors. How about it, kid? Are you scared now? The saint straightened his back. The surging totem power in his body gave him great confidence. And there was a demonic centipede beast beside him that was comparable to the 8th transformation of the godly soul realm. With such strength, the saint knew that he could even fight top geniuses such as Xian Hao, the young war emperor, and LV Qinghan, not to mention some ordinary geniuses from the 7 superpowers. It should be known that even the ordinary saint and the saintess did not dare to fight with those top geniuses. Only the Double Crown King dared to fight with them. The saint thought that the young man in front of him was at most an ordinary genius from the 7 superpowers. It was impossible for him to be one of those top geniuses. However, the saint did not see a trace of fear in Yi Guchun. Yi Guchun's eyes were shining. Is this the supreme totem? Yi Guchun had always wanted to understand what level the totem in his body was at. The thousand-legged blood centipede totem of Saint Xueling was indeed much more powerful than the magic scorpion. However, in Yi Guchun's estimation, it was still inferior to the totem on his 5-color golden core. Could it be that the 5-colored golden core totem in my body is of a higher level than the supreme totem? Yi Guchun was puzzled. In the barbarian tribe, the supreme totem was already qualified to become a holy son or holy daughter. What kind of status did the totem above the supreme totem have in the barbarian tribe? Yi Guchun was suddenly curious. Brat, you are far too arrogant. Let me show you what it means to be a supreme totem. Seeing that Yi Guchun was not afraid at all, the saint of Xueling's face turned cold. As the saint of the blood barbarian tribe, it was unforgivable for him to be looked down upon. The saint of Xueling swung the bone whip again. This time, the power of the bone whip was far more powerful than before. The air screeched. Yi Guchun held the blood prison sword and injected his genuine qi into it. A sharp blood light gushed out. He swung his sword and collided with the bone whip, creating a blast of air. With the help of the thousand-legged blood centipede totem, the saint of Xueling's strength soared. He rushed forward and fought with Yi Guchun. The totem power and genuine qi collided, causing the entire natural moat gorge to roar. At this moment, the demonic centipede beast also rushed forward. Its sharp mouthparts were like 2 machetes, biting toward Yi Guchun. The saint of Xueling's eyes were cruel, as if he could see Yi Guchun being cut in half. Then, Yi Guchun looked extremely calm. He directly activated the vermilion bird totem on his chest. The strong power of the flame totem turned into a pair of gorgeous fire wings on his back. With a slight vibration, Yi Guchun flew up into the air, and the demonic centipede beast missed. When Yi Guchun took out the vermilion bird totem, the saint of Xueling's face suddenly froze. Then, as if he had seen the most terrifying thing in his life, his eyes, which had been filled with cruelty, trembled. Because when Yi Guchun released the vermilion bird totem, the saint of Xueling felt that his thousand-legged blood centipede totem was shaking and being suppressed. Even his supreme totem's power was reduced by about 30%. How is this possible? Is this the ancestral totem? The saint of Xueling let out an unprecedented roar. He could not believe it. Ancestral totem? Yiguchen, who was flying in the air, heard the Saint of Schwelling's words and raised his eyebrows. According to his tone, the ancestral totem should be of a higher level than the supreme totem. No, impossible, absolutely impossible. You are not from the barbarian tribe. How can you have the ancestral totem? Tell me, what kind of trick did you use? The Saint of Schwelling gritted his teeth and let out an unwilling roar. It was absolutely impossible for a non-barbarian to have the ancestral totem. The ancestral totem was the supreme barbarian tribe. If someone could get the ancestral totem, his status would be higher than that of the saint and holy maiden. Moreover, the totem Yiguchen released was the fire attribute totem, which was specially used to restrain the blood barbarian tribe. Therefore, the Saint of Schwelling could not believe it, nor did he want to believe it. Yiguchen's eyes flashed. It seemed that the 5-color golden core and the 5 totems on it were more valuable than he had imagined. Even among the barbarian tribe, it was absolutely rare. However, now that Yiguchen had shown the ancestral totem, it meant that the Saint of Schwelling had to die. Because Yiguchen could not let the barbarian tribe know that he had the ancestral totem. Once the news leaked out, Yiguchen would not only be targeted by the barbarian tribe, but it would also be difficult for him to blend in with the barbarian tribe. Therefore, the Saint of Schwelling had to die. Yiguchen slowly raised his hand. The crimson divine fire of the rosefinch gushed out from the totem and rose up in his palm. The Saint of Schwelling's pupils shrank. The blood barbarian tribe specialized in the way of blood, which was cold and strange. They were most afraid of yang forces such as fire and thunder. Therefore, the blood barbarian tribe was most afraid of big tribes such as the fire tribe and the thunder tribe. Rosefinch divine fire, damn it. Only the holy maiden of the fire tribe has it. The Saint of Schwelling's face darkened again. Even if he did not want to believe it, he had to. Yiguchen's divine fire of the rosefinch divine fire confirmed the fact that he had the rosefinch totem. Boom! The crimson flame poured down like a waterfall. The Saint of Schwelling gritted his teeth. Although he was very afraid of Yiguchen's divine fire of the rosefinch divine fire, he still had ways to resist it. Blood light shield. The Saint of Schwelling took out a defensive magic weapon. At this moment, Yiguchen took out a dual-colored flame again. It was the heavenly sun Xianming fire. That is, the unique fire of heaven and earth. The Saint of Schwelling was stunned again when he felt the horrible temperature of the heavenly sun Xianming fire. Not only did he have the divine fire of the rosefinch divine fire, but he also had the unique fire of heaven and earth. However, the Saint of Schwelling's nightmare was not over yet. Streaks of purple thunderbolts gathered on Yiguchen's body. The unique thunder of heaven and earth. The Saint of Schwelling's expression froze as if he had seen a ghost in broad daylight. He had never seen anyone who could refine the unique fire and unique thunder at the same time. And these two forces could completely suppress him. Just when the Saint of Schwelling's lips were trembling and he was shocked by Yiguchen's means. A silver thunderbolt burst out of Yiguchen's body again, shaking the void and giving out thunderous roars. Xian thunder. The Saint of Schwelling took a closer look. Blood rushed to his head and he almost fainted. Chapter 385. The blood barbarian tribe was best restrained by the power of thunder and flame. Because many of the blood barbarian tribe's skills relied on blood and blood poison to exert the greatest effect. Lightning and fire were both extremely effective against the Tao of blood. Therefore, the blood barbarian tribe was very cautious and almost never fought with people who had these two powers. But now, looking at Yiguchen, who was flying in the air and shooting out exotic fire and unusual thunder, the blood spirit saint's mind went blank. A trace of fear that he had never felt before surged from his heart. The young man in front of him had almost completely defeated him in terms of power attribute. Exotic fire and unusual thunder, and more than one kind. Where did this guy come from? The blood spirit saint's lips were slightly pale, but he was cursing in his heart. The holy sons and holy daughters of other tribes might be able to fight with such people. But as the blood barbarian tribe's holy son, he was most afraid of this kind of people. Unfortunately, he had run into this kind of person. Boom! Yi Guchen directly poured down flames and thunderbolts. The blood light shield that the blood spirit saint had taken out immediately sizzled and emitted white smoke. Its surface was full of cracks. Oh no! The blood spirit saint's heart skipped a beat, and he hurriedly retreated. The next moment, the blood light shield exploded and turned into dust in the flames and thunderbolts. Yi Guchen held the blood prison sword and rushed straight down. Seeing this, the blood spirit saint gritted his teeth and formed the blood demon hand on his arm again. Yi Guchen's body was surging with flames and thunderbolts. He slashed out with his sword, which contained the power of flames and thunderbolts. The blood spirit saint threw out the blood bone whip, which collided with the blood prison sword. With a harsh sound of collision, the totem power on the blood bone whip was mostly wiped out by the flames and thunderbolts. And the blood prison sword directly cut the bone whip into pieces. Seeing this, the blood spirit saint's eyes turned cold. He flashed forward and slammed the blood demon hand on Yi Guchen's chest. Yi Guchen's eyes flashed and he immediately used his defensive martial art, All Heaven's Protection. The guardian Vajra's shadow appeared on the surface of Yi Guchen's body. The saint of Xueling's palm hit on it and made a buzzing sound like a bell. After all, the protection of Luo Tian was only a spirit-level defensive martial skill. To the current Yi Guchen, it was not very effective, but it still managed to block the palm of the saint of Xueling temporarily. Immediately, Yi Guchen punched out with the power of strange fire and strange thunder, colliding with the blood demon hand of the holy son of Xueling again. Bang! In this clash, Yi Guchen had the complete upper hand. The saint of Xueling was at an absolute disadvantage in terms of both power and attribute. Ah! The saint of Xueling screamed. His demonic blood hand was broken again. Its bones cracked and shattered. At the same time, the power of Yi Guchen's strange fire and strange thunder penetrated the saint of Xueling's arm and instantly burned it into charcoal. Don't you have blood medicine to heal your wounds? Come on, let's do it again. Yi Guchen's lips curled into a cold smile. He had cut off the saint of Xueling's arm, and the saint of Xueling had taken the blood medicine to recover. However, Yi Guchen knew that such precious blood medicine must be extremely rare even in the blood barbarian tribe. Even the saint of Xueling could not have too much of it. Sure enough, after hearing Yi Guchen's words, the saint of Xueling's face became even more ghastly. He retreated quickly. At the same time, the demonic centipede beside him attacked. The blood hell sword in Yi Guchen's hand vibrated and resonated with the void. An extremely terrifying sword wave poured out like a tide. As Yi Guchen's understanding of the void sword skill deepened, it would not be long before this spiritual level sword skill was completely comprehended to the martial level. At that time, Yi Guchen could officially cultivate the great void sword wave. The demonic centipede had a strong blood armor, but it still could not resist the power of the sword wave. The fierce sword wave directly penetrated the blood armor and shook the demonic centipede into minced meat. Yi Guchen took advantage of the situation and slashed at the demonic centipede's mouth with his sword. Flames burst out from the blade. Like a red-hot knife cutting through fat, the centipede demonic beast was cut into two halves from the middle. A ferocious demonic beast comparable to the 8th transformation of the Divine Soul Realm was killed by Yi Guchen with one slash. Damn it! The saint of Xueling's eyes twitched violently. How could he not know that the young man in front of him was not as simple as an ordinary genius from the 7 superpowers? Who the hell are you? The saint of Xueling roared as he retreated quickly. He already had the intention to retreat, with a trace of fear in his eyes. Yi Guchen's cold eyes flashed. Since his vermilion bird totem had revealed itself, how could he let the saint of Xueling go? Swoosh! The blood sword edge cut through the air, with the violent power of fire and thunder, and slashed at the saint of Xueling's head. Thousand-legged blood centipede, totem spirit manifestation. The saint of Xueling roared, completely bursting out the totem power. In an instant, a blood centipede phantom, which was much larger than the demonic centipede, rose from the totem. That terrifying blood-red totem power poured out in all directions with a loud bang. Totem spirit manifestation? Yi Guchen's eyes were slightly surprised. Regarding totem skills, Yiguchen only knew totem possession. For example, his Azure Dragon Claw, Vermilion Bird Wings, and Wu Sang's Scorpion Tail Hook, etc. But this was the first time that Yiguchen had seen a totem spirit manifestation. Oh, boy, although you have the ancestral totem, you don't know how to awaken it. It's really a waste for such a totem to fall into your hands. The Saint of Xueling seemed to have gained a little confidence after using this skill. The totem spirit manifestation can only be used after the totem is awakened. Yiguchen suddenly understood. He did not know much about the barbarian tribe, so he did not know the secret. In the air, the blood centipede phantom rushed toward Yiguchen. The vigorous totem power spread out, causing the surrounding mountain walls to rumble. At the same time, a blood spiritual shock wave spread toward Yiguchen. My blood centipede totem also has the means of divine soul attack. Boy, go to hell. The Saint of Xueling was ready to attack, waiting for the moment when Yiguchen's Sea of Consciousness was attacked. As expected, Yiguchen's body suddenly stopped. His face seemed to be pale, as if his Sea of Consciousness had been shaken. Good chance. The Saint of Xueling held the bone whip, approached Yiguchen, and swung it toward his head. If the whip fell, Yiguchen would be killed in one blow. The Saint of Xueling smiled cruelly, as if he had seen Yiguchen's head explode like a watermelon. But the next moment, the smile on the Saint of Xueling's face froze. Because in an instant, Yiguchen suddenly raised his eyes. His face was clear, and his Sea of Consciousness was not injured at all. Oh no! The Saint of Xueling's heart suddenly sank. But it was too late. A bright silver spiritual shock wave spread out from Yiguchen's Sea of Consciousness. It was the star soul wave released by the meteorite demon soul butterfly in his Sea of Consciousness. It's over, Yiguchen stared at the Saint of Xueling coldly. He was like the judge of hell, delivering the verdict of life and death. Chapter 386. No! The Saint of Xueling's eyes were filled with fear. In the past, Blood Spirit Saint could only see such fear in the eyes of others. But now the roles were reversed. He was the one who showed fear and despair. The star soul wave released by the meteorite demon soul butterfly was so powerful that it directly attacked Blood Spirit Saint's Sea of Consciousness. In an instant, Blood Spirit Saint felt a shock in his head. He had a splitting headache, as if a giant axe was chopping down from the top of his head. He could not even stand steadily, let alone fight back. And because his Sea of Consciousness was hit, it was difficult for Blood Spirit Saint to control the totem spirit to fight against Yiguchen. Yiguchen raised his hand and released the exotic fire and exotic thunder, which directly drowned Blood Spirit Saint. Blood Explosion Secret Skill. Blood Spirit Saint howled miserably in the midst of the exotic fire and exotic thunder, as if he wanted to make a last stand. Accompanied by a loud explosion, a dense blood-red light also burst out, temporarily pushing the strange fire and lightning to the side. Blood Spirit Saint, who revealed himself, was extremely embarrassed. His bloody clothes were tattered, and his body was scorched black, with smoke rising from it. He looked at Yiguchen with resentment. Then, he formed a seal with both hands and used the Blood Explosion Secret Skill to squeeze out his potential. Finally, he condensed a blood-red seal with terrifying fluctuations and rushed toward Yiguchen. Blood Evil Seal. The blood-red seal was like a mountain, bringing a strong sense of oppression. Yiguchen's expression did not change. The thick blood light spread to the blood hell sword. He struck out with the sword, and the shadow of Yama appeared behind him. The fifth move of the god-slaying sword art, Yama. A blood-red sword light, which was dozens of feet long, flew across the sky and directly smashed the blood evil seal. But at the moment when the seal was smashed, a little blood light directly entered Yiguchen's body with lightning speed. Yiguchen frowned and checked his body. The blood barbarian tribe had always used strange means. Yiguchen did not want to be fooled by any tricks. The little blood light had no lethality or attack, but it condensed a blood talisman in Yiguchen's body. What is this? Yiguchen's tone was slightly cold. On the other side, after using the Blood Explosion Secret Skill, Blood Saint's state fell to the bottom. His entire body was charred black. His skin and flesh were torn apart by the strange fire and thunder. However, when he looked at Yi Guchen, there was a sneer of vengeance. This is the killing talisman of our blood barbarian tribe. As long as you are hit by this talisman, within a month, any blood barbarian tribe member can use a special secret method to track you. So, you will definitely die. Blood Spirit Holy Sun sneered and coughed up blood again. Oh, I see. Yi Guchen's eyes were indifferent. In other words, the Surekill talisman would remain in Yi Guchen's body for a month. During this month, any blood barbarian who wanted to could track down Yi Guchen and treat him as prey. Of course, if you're willing to let me go, I'll remove the Surekill talisman. What do you think? This is good for both of us. The Saint of Xueling did not want to die either. He was the saint of a clan. How could he be willing to die in the hands of an unknown young man? So you're threatening me? That's fine. Yi Guchen nodded slightly. The Saint of Xueling smiled and heaved a sigh of relief. Humph, this boy is still too young. After you let me go, I will not lift the killing talisman. When I return to my family, I will gather a group of masters to kill you. Then I will make you suffer. The Holy Son of Xueling was extremely resentful. As the Holy Son of a clan, when had he ever suffered such a loss? In addition, the Saint of Xueling was insidious and vengeful. It was impossible for him to let Yi Guchen go. Yi Guchen slowly raised his hand and a sharp sword qi gathered in his palm. Seeing Yi Guchen's action, the Saint of Xueling's eyelids suddenly twitched. He had an ominous feeling. What are you going to do? Didn't we agree? I'm sorry. The blood barbarian tribe is not enough to make me afraid. Moreover, even if all the barbarian tribes work together, they would not be able to threaten me. Because I, Yi Guchen, have never been one to be threatened. Yi Guchen's tone was as cold as the cold wind. As he raised his hand, a beautiful and terrifying golden sword qi lotus flower with destructive power formed above his palm. Hearing this, the Saint of Xueling's heart suddenly sank. But in an instant, the Saint of Xueling seemed to think of something. His eyes widened and a sense of horror crept up his face. What did you say your name was? Yi Guchen. The Saint of Xueling's voice trembled and he could not hide his horror. Yi Guchen, the sword master, was so famous that even the barbarian tribe had heard of him. It was rumored that because of Yi Guchen's death, the holy sons and holy daughters had one less enemy. But now, the young man in front of him claimed to be the sword master. This made the Saint of Xueling's heart suddenly tighten. And he felt that the strength shown by the young man in front of him did not seem to be fake. Aren't you dead? How could it be? The Saint of Xueling wailed in his heart. He had wanted to capture Xiao Wanru just to satisfy his desire, but he had run into this devil. Yi Guchen looked at the Saint of Xueling with cold eyes. I have said that among the holy sons of the barbarian tribe, I will start with you. After saying this, Yi Guchen flicked his finger and threw out the golden sword lotus. No. I am the holy son of the blood barbarian tribe. How can I die here? The Saint of Xueling retreated quickly and tried to escape. However, he was already at the end of his rope. How could he escape this Surekill attack? The golden sword lotus exploded on the Saint of Xueling. A majestic golden lotus enveloped the Saint of Xueling. As the lotus petals rotated, the Saint of Xueling's body was cut by countless sword qi. It was as if he was being dismembered. Ah! A shrill scream came to an abrupt end. A holy son had died. Looking at the ground full of minced flesh and blood, Yi Guchen had a direct understanding of the power of the reincarnation sword lotus. Not only was it powerful, but it was also extremely painful as the petals of the sword qi rotated. The poor Saint of Xueling was used as a touchstone by Yi Guchen to test the power of the reincarnation sword lotus. At this moment, Yi Guchen suddenly found something in the pool of minced flesh and blood. Yi Guchen went forward and picked it up. It was a token that looked like blood jade. The word, holy, was engraved on the front. Is this the Holy Sun token? Yi Guchen thought. In the barbarian tribe, the holy sons and holy daughters had their own tokens. They always carried them with them and would not fall into the hands of others. The higher-ups of the 7 superpowers also judged the merits of killing according to the Holy Sun token and Holy Daughter token. Yi Guchen casually put the Holy Sun token into his vital ring. After killing a Holy Sun, Yi Guchen's expression did not change at all. It was as if killing a Holy Sun was not a big deal. Yi Guchen also knew the reason why he could kill Xue Ling so easily. It was because his exotic fire and thunder were the natural nemesis of the Blood Barbarian tribe. If it were another Holy Sun of the Barbarian tribe, Yi Guchen might not have been able to deal with him so easily. Therefore, it was not that the Holy Sun of the Barbarian tribe was weak, but that Holy Sun Xue Ling was too unlucky to have met Yi Guchen, who was his natural nemesis. Although I have killed Xue Ling, the must-kill token is a little troublesome. But it will only last for a month. Yi Guchen thought to himself. The must-kill token was just a little troublesome for Yi Guchen, but it was not a big threat. After adjusting his breath for a while, Yi Guchen chased after Xiao Lai and the others. After Yi Guchen killed Xue Ling, there was a disturbance in the Blood Barbarian tribe. Chapter 387. The Blood Barbarian tribe was located in a place called the Heaven Blood Demon Castle. Inside the castle, there was a hall that emitted a gloomy aura. An old man in a blood-red robe was looking at a blood-red stone platform in front of him solemnly. There were many blood-red jade tokens on the platform. As for one of the fragments, it had already shattered. Xue Ling is dead, the old man said emotionlessly. Behind him, an elder of the Blood Barbarian tribe stepped forward and bowed. He asked, "High Priest, do we need to send experts to kill Xue Ling's murderer? That person is now not far from northern Liang City. Currently, the 7 great factions of the empire have all gathered in northern Liang City. There are as many experts as there are clouds. If you are discovered by the experts in the city, let alone all of you, even I will not be able to return." High Priest Xue Wuye coldly said. "What should we do? How can we let go of the person who killed our holy son?" The elder was unwilling to give up. "Don't worry. Xue Ling won't provoke strong cultivators easily. The one who killed him must be a genius of the 7 great forces. He'll have to fight one day. When the time comes, ask the holy sons and holy daughters of the Blood Barbarian tribe to kill him together. He won't be able to escape," said the high priest coldly. The elder bowed. He knew that Xue Ling's strength was at most average among the holy sons and holy daughters of the Blood Barbarian tribe. There were several holy sons and holy daughters who were stronger than him. Therefore, they thought that the genius who killed Xue Ling could not be that strong. He would not be able to escape the pursuit of the other holy sons and holy daughters. An order came from the sacrificial hall of the Heaven Blood Demon Castle. All the holy sons and holy daughters of the Blood Barbarian tribe received the order from the high priest Xue Yuli. A siege against Yi Guchen was about to begin. In a city, a sexy Blood Barbarian woman in revealing clothes suddenly sensed something and took out a jade slip. All the holy princes and holy maidens of the Blood Barbarian tribe should surround and kill one person. Why would the high priest give such an order? Apart from Xian Hao, the young war emperor and a few others, who else is qualified for us to surround and kill? This woman was one of the holy maidens of the Blood Barbarian tribe, Xue Chan. There was a trace of disdain on her face as she felt that the high priestess was making a mountain out of a molehill. At the same time, several other saints and saintesses also received orders to keep an eye on Yi Guchen's movements. If there was a chance, they were to kill him. Of course, they were the same as the blood cicada. They looked down on this order and felt that it was unnecessary. In a wasteland, corpses littered the ground. It was an incomparably bloody scene. A youth with a scar on his face rode on a huge blood-colored demonic wolf. He had a pensive look in his eyes. "It's just the death of Xue Ling. Is there a need to make such a big fuss? With Xue Ling's strength, the person who killed him is probably just an ordinary genius. Why use a butcher's knife to kill a chicken? The high priest is a little muddle-headed." The scarred young man shook his head slightly and sneered. In the barbarian tribe, the high priest's status was extremely high. No one dared to speak rudely to him. However, this youth spoke casually and did not care. This was because he was the most powerful holy son and saintess of the blood barbarian tribe, Holy Son Shui Wuchang. Of course, whether it was Shui Wuchang or Blood Cicada, they did not know that the person who killed Shui Ling was not an ordinary genius, but Yi Guqin from the Sword Sect. They also did not know that Yi Guqin possessed the exotic fire and unusual thunder that could naturally suppress the blood barbarian tribe. Therefore, it was hard to say who was the hunter and who was the prey in this siege. On the other side, Xiao Lai and the others who had escaped from the natural Moat Gorge were riding on the Fergana horses and rushing through the Gobi Desert. They did not dare to stop at all, for they were afraid that Shui Ling would catch up with them after killing Yi Guqin. "Husband, how much longer until we reach northern Liang City?" Madame Xiao, who was riding on the horse, shouted with a pale face and a trembling voice. The injury on her shoulder had only been treated briefly and she had taken some elixirs, but it was still very painful. "Madam, hold on a little longer," Xiao Lai said with a trace of guilt in his heart. He felt very guilty towards Yi Guqin. If we had listened to him, we might have been able to go around the natural Moat Gorge. It's all our fault for wanting to reach northern Liang City as soon as possible. That's why we didn't listen to him. Now, he has to cover our retreat. Xiao Lai shook his head and sighed deeply. He was a person who valued friendship. At this moment, he thought that Yi Guqin might have met with a mishap and felt very guilty. "Husband, don't feel guilty anymore. We were kind enough to bring him along. Now is the time for him to repay our kindness. There's no need to blame yourself," Madame Xiao said matter-of-factly. It was as if they had done Yi Guqin a great favor by bringing Yi Guqin along. Yi Guqin had killed the totem warriors and healed Xiao Lai's injuries. Now, he had even let them escape and covered their retreat. Madame Xiao directly ignored these favors. "Mother, you are too unreasonable." Xiao Wanru also felt that Madame Zhao's words were extremely harsh. She had been feeling down. Now that she heard Madame Zhao's sharp words, she felt indignant for Yi Guqin. "Wanru, you don't understand. Do you know why this young man is helping us? He wants to please us, please you, the young madam of the Shinta clan. He is doing this to hug the Shinta clan's thighs. It's all for himself." Madame Xiao tried to figure out Yi Guqin's thoughts with her snobbish way of thinking. "Enough!" Xiao Lai shouted and raised his tiger-like eyebrows. "Am I wrong? Isn't that the case?" Madame Xiao snorted coldly. However, at this moment, a faint voice suddenly came from behind them. "To please the Shinta clan. Is the Shinta clan worthy?" A figure dressed in black and wearing a bamboo hat lightly flew over from behind. "Little brother. Young Master Yi." When they saw who it was, Xiao Lai and Xiao Wanru were shocked. They were stunned for a moment and could not recover from their shock. "Ghost." Madame Xiao was even more horrified. She thought that she had seen Yi Guqin's ghost. It was no wonder that they were so surprised. They could not believe that Yi Guqin, who had faced the holy son of Shui Ling and a group of totem warriors alone, could return safely. Xiao Lai had guessed that Yi Guqin should be a genius disciple of some aristocratic family. Therefore, when Yi Guqin said that he had killed Wu Sang and the other totem warriors, Xiao Lai could still believe it. However, now that he was surrounded by a holy son and a group of totem warriors, he was still safe and sound. This was beyond Xiao Lai's expectations. "Young master, you are really all right." Although Xiao Wanru was shocked, she was more happy. That group of blood barbarians. Xiao Lai wanted to say something but stopped. He looked at Yi Guqin. Yi Guqin did not speak. He nodded lightly. "Hiss." Xiao Lai took a deep breath and suppressed the shock in his heart. A holy son had died just like that. He had died at the hands of this unknown young man in front of him. Even Xiao Lai was curious about Yi Guqin's identity. On the other hand, Madame Xiao, who had calmed down, looked at Yi Guqin with uncertainty. She had previously slandered Yi Guqin, saying that he had abandoned the Xiao family guards and escaped alone. This time, Yi Guqin was alone. The fact that he was safe and sound was enough to prove that Yi Guqin was telling the truth. However, this fact was like a loud slap to Madame Zhao's face. She looked a little embarrassed. Xiao Lai and Xiao Wanru's resentful gazes made Madame Zhao's cheeks burn. However, no matter how self-righteous Madame Xiao was, she knew that the young man in front of her was not an ordinary person. Thinking of this, Madame Xiao forced a smile on her snow-white cheeks. She said, "You did well this time. You did have some credit." Yi Guchen glanced at Madame Xiao coldly. Although Madame Xiao was smiling, her tone was like a superior praising a subordinate. "I believe that your cultivation is not weak. Since you saved us this time, I have decided to let you enter the Shinto family in the future. At the very least, you can become young Master Shinto and Wanru's personal guard." Madame Xiao raised her chin slightly. She thought that she had given Yi Guchen a great benefit and grace. Chapter 388. Become the Shinto family's guard? Yi Guchen was not angry at all when he heard Madame Xiao's words. Instead, he wanted to laugh. Yi Guchen was the sword master of the Saint Origin dynasty. On top of that, he was one of the 7 major forces, the sword master ranked first in the inner courtyard of the Forest of Pagodas. Who in the entire Saint Origin dynasty was qualified to make Yi Guchen a guard? Even if Yi Guchen stood in front of Shinto Miao and said he wanted to be his guard, Shinto Miao would not dare. Would Shinto Miao dare to make Yi Guchen a guard? Shinto Miao had attacked Yi Guchen several times in the past. However, as Yi Guchen's cultivation increased, the gap between him and Shinto Miao's strength gradually widened. Shinto Miao would not be able to eat or sleep well if he made Yi Guchen a guard. Yi Guchen could not help but laugh when he thought of this. A breeze blew past and lifted the black veil. Madame Xiao happened to see his smile. With a faint smile on her face, she said with a faint sense of pride, "I know you are very happy. After all, not everyone has the qualifications to enter a super family like the Shinto family, much less become young Master Shinto and Wanru's bodyguard. This is my reward for your escort this time." "Madam, let's forget it." Xiao Lai sighed. He vaguely sensed that Yi Guchen's background seemed to be greater than he had guessed. "Why forget it? Isn't this what this little brother is after? I'm doing him a favor." Madame Xiao had a superior look on her face. Even Xiao Wanru, who was at the side, was somewhat puzzled. This was because she had seen Yi Guchen's faint smile just now. Could it be that young Master Yi really wants to join the Shinto family? Xiao Wanru could not help but feel empty when she thought of this. She was disappointed in Yi Guchen again. "Are you satisfied now?" Madame Xiao lifted her chin slightly and looked at Yi Guchen. Frogs in the well cannot talk about the sea, summer insects cannot talk about the ice. Yi Guchen shook his head slightly, his tone indifferent. Yi Guchen had nothing to say to a snobbish person like Madame Xiao. "Big brother Xiao, let's head straight to northern Liang City," Yi Guchen said to Xiao Lai indifferently. "Oh, okay. Xiao Lai naturally did not dare to neglect Yi Guchen and hurriedly nodded his head. "Kid, don't regret it. When the time comes, even if you beg me, I will not let you join the Shinto family." Madame Xiao, who had been ignored, coldly snorted with an ashen face. Yi Guchen and the others headed towards northern Liang City. Along the way, Madame Xiao tirelessly told Xiao Wanru about Yi Guchen's various faults. Things like not knowing how to be grateful, being obstinate and self-opinionated, etc. Xiao Wanru had previously wondered if Yi Guchen really had some ulterior motive for helping them like Madame Xiao had said. "Wanru, let mother tell you, when we reach northern Liang City, that kid will definitely beg mother to let him join the Shinto family. Do you still have any feelings for such a person who cares so much about face?" Madame Xiao had previously sensed that Xiao Wanru seemed to have some special feelings for Yi Guchen. Therefore, she tried her best to smear Yi Guchen so that Xiao Wanru could marry Shinto Miao with peace of mind. "Is that so?" Xiao Wanru's beautiful eyes were confused. After that, she also sighed and recalled the slanderous words Yi Guchen had said about the sword sect. Perhaps it is really as mother said. He is a headstrong and self-opinionated person. Xiao Wanru could not help but feel a little disappointed when she thought of this. She no longer paid attention to Yi Guchen and cut off the thoughts in her heart. Seeing this, Madame Zhao's eyes carried a trace of joy. On the other hand, Yi Guchen felt that Xiao Wanru's attitude towards him had become a little cold. However, Yi Guchen did not care. He did not have any feelings for Xiao Wanru in the first place. Now, Yi Guchen was concerned about the exchange between the 7 major factions in northern Liang City. One could imagine how exciting the competition would be when the top geniuses of the 7 major factions gathered together. Yiguchen also had a trace of anticipation. Just as Yiguchen and the rest were rushing towards northern Liang City, the city was extremely lively. Northern Liang City was an important city in the Great Desolate Mansion. It was also the base of the Shinto family. It was a magnificent city that occupied a large area. Now, there were 2 major events that were about to take place in northern Liang City. The first event was the marriage of the Shinto family's genius, Shinto Miao, and the pearl of the Gongsun family, Gongsun Xiaoya. The Gongsun family was also a super family in the Great Desolate Mansion. They specialized in forging weapons and had a strong foundation. This event was supposed to be a grand occasion for the entire northern Liang City. However, because of another matter, the exchange between the 7 major factions had begun. Therefore, the wedding banquet of the Shinto family was postponed. After all, the Shinto family was only a super family. It was far from being comparable to the 7 major factions. In 7 days, the people from the 7 major factions had all arrived in northern Liang City. The exchange meeting was held immediately. The exchange did not last for just 1 or 2 days. It lasted for 5 days. As for the competition between the top geniuses, it was placed on the last 2 days. This was because it was the most important competition that would determine the division of the various factions. Northern Liang City, House Yunyan. House Yunyan was the most luxurious and high-end restaurant in northern Liang City. Recently, many people from the 7 major factions had gathered here for an exchange. At this moment, on the highest level of House Yunyan, 2 ladies were sitting by the window. One of them was dressed in pink. She was extremely beautiful, but her face was slightly haggard and had a trace of paleness. The other lady was dressed in white and had black hair. Her eyebrows were picturesque and her skin was as white as snow. She had a classical beauty to her. They were the 2 geniuses of the Consonance Palace, Zither Fairy and LV Qinghan. Senior sister, why did you ask me to come here? Zither Fairy was puzzled. Looking at Zither Fairy's haggard face, LV Qinghan sighed and said, in another 2 or 3 days, the exchange between the geniuses of the 7 major factions will take place. Senior sister brought you here to relax. Isn't that good? Thank you, senior sister. Although Zither Fairy was not interested, she could not refuse. At this moment, a handsome young man dressed in white walked up the stairs. This young man dressed in white had a handsome face. He had a smile on his face. A beautiful jade hung from his waist, and he held a folding fan in his hand. He was a rare handsome young man. With the arrival of this young man, almost everyone at the other tables on the top floor looked at him. It's little spiritual Emperor Zhou Tong from the 3 imperial palaces. As expected of his name. Not only is he handsome, but his cultivation and strength are also extraordinary. Yes, his strength is second only to the young war emperor among the younger generation of the 3 imperial palaces. It seems like he is here to meet a beauty. Many people whispered as their gazes fell on Zhou Tong. Then, they turned to look at LV Qinghan and Zither Fairy. In the surrounding crowd, only a young man dressed in black did not pay any attention to Zhou Tong. He sat alone at a table by the window and slowly sipped the wine in his cup. Chapter 389. When Zhou Tong arrived, he immediately saw the beauty he had been thinking about day and night. The Zither Fairy's face was beautiful and graceful. Zhou Tong had seen her once before and it was hard for him to forget. In addition, Zither Fairy specialized in Zither Dao. She had developed an elegant temperament that was very attractive. Lu Qinghan on the side did not lose to the Zither Fairy in terms of looks and temperament. But first of all, Lu Qinghan's identity and capabilities were slightly higher than Zhou Tong's. Second of all, Lu Qinghan was the perfect partner for the Little War Emperor. Zhou Tong did not have the guts to fight with the Little War Emperor for a beauty. Luckily, other than the fact that the Zither Fairy's cultivation was slightly weaker, she did not lose to Lu Qinghan in everything else. Therefore, Zhou Tong also liked her and pursued her. Senior sister Lu, Zither Fairy, how have you been? Zhou Tong's relationship with Lu Qinghan was not bad, so he called her senior sister. Zhou Tong, long time no see. Your cultivation has improved a lot. Lu Qinghan softly smiled. Sorry, senior sister. I am a bit tired and will be resting at my place. The Zither fairy's expression was calm as she stood up to leave. Junior sister, wait. Zhou Tong kindly invited us to a gathering. It's not good for you to reject him like this. Lu Qinghan placed her hand on the Zither fairy's shoulder and softly smiled. Junior sister, if you are tired, this Zhou has a top-grade spirit cleansing pill here. Perhaps it can alleviate your fatigue. Zhou Tong saw the opportunity and handed over a jade bottle. Seeing Zhou Tong casually give away a top-grade treasure pill, the surrounding crowd was secretly surprised. A supreme Dan was extraordinarily valuable. Only a heaven's favorite from the 7 controlling forces could give out a Dan without frowning. Ah, Zhou Tong, it seems like you really care about my junior sister. You are giving her a supreme Dan so casually. Lu Qinghan smiled. Zhou Tong had contacted Lu Qinghan earlier and wanted her to be his matchmaker. Lu Qinghan was happy to fulfill his wish. Therefore, she did not hold back in complimenting Zhou Tong. However, the Zither fairy's expression did not change at all. Back then, when Yiguchen acquired the bronze cauldron, he gave her many supreme dawn. In contrast, when Zhou Tong gave out this one, it was as if he had given out a heavenly gift. This made Zither fairy even more dispirited. Zhou Tong and Yiguchen couldn't be compared at all. Thank you for your kindness, Mr. Zhou, but Zither fairy does not need this item. Zither fairy declined politely, not wanting to accept Zhou Tong's treasured pill. Junior sister, Zhou Tong has good intentions towards you. LV Qinghan said with a slight frown. Junior sister, are you embarrassed? There's no need to be polite with this Zhou. Zhou Tong still had a calm smile on his face. Helpless, the Zither fairy waved her hand and a large number of jade bottles were placed on the table. As the stoppers were opened, an extremely thick pill fragrance immediately filled the entire top floor of the House of Smoke. These are all supreme-grade elixirs. Some of the geniuses from the surrounding forces were stunned. Even the core disciples of the 7 major forces would not be able to possess so many supreme-grade elixirs. Junior sister, this is... LV Qinghan's jade-like face froze slightly. These were all given to me by Mr. Yiguchen. That's why I said I don't need your elixirs. Zither fairy's tone was calm, but when she mentioned Yiguchen, there was a slight change in her expression. There was a slight sense of loss and sadness. Zhou Tong's face was slightly stiff. He looked at Zither fairy's supreme-grade elixirs, and then looked at his own shabby bottle of elixirs. Even Zhou Tong felt a little embarrassed, and directly put away the elixirs without batting an eyelid. He saw that Zither fairy's face was filled with sadness as if she was thinking of someone, but there was a hint of gloominess in his heart. It's Yiguchen again. Zhou Tong's expression didn't change, but his heart was cold. He and Ji Yen were both the 3rd young emperor of the 3 imperial palaces, and their relationship was not bad. Ji Yen was killed by Yiguchen in the Void Sword realm, and naturally, Zhou Tong didn't have a good impression of Yiguchen. However, Yiguchen's death was later announced, and Zhou Tong couldn't be jealous of a dead person, so he didn't care too much. But now, the beauty he thought of day and night was hiding another person in her heart. And it was a dead person. How could Zhou Tong accept this, and how could he not be angry? However, due to his deep thoughts and disguise, Zhou Tong did not give himself away. On the surface, he still maintained a refined and courteous appearance. Junior apprentice sister, I saw that you've been working so hard every day that you're completely worn out. That's why I set up this banquet in House Yunyan so that you could relax. Sigh, I didn't think that I would make junior apprentice sister even more upset. Zhou Tong sighed slightly and directly picked up a cup of wine, slightly bowed to Zither fairy, and then drank it in one gulp. Even Zither fairy was a little surprised by this scene. She thought that Zhou Tong would be angry and ashamed. But she didn't expect him to be so polite. Even the people around who were paying attention were secretly amazed. There's nothing to say about Zhou Tong's temperament. As one of the 3 little kings, what woman can't he get? He's actually so respectful to a woman. Yes, young Master Zhou Tong's temperament is really unmatched. Hearing the praises around him, Zhou Tong's expression was still indifferent. No one could see through his schemes and disguise. Junior sister, look, Zhou Tong is treating you so politely. Don't be so unreasonable. Seeing that Zither Fairy's attitude seemed to have softened, LV Qinghan continued to persuade her. She believed in Zhou Tong's character and was willing to play matchmaker between Zhou Tong and Zither Fairy. Zither Fairy was helpless and could only drink a cup of wine. Seeing this, Zhou Tong's eyes lit up and he directly sat beside Zither Fairy. Zither Fairy directly moved her body and moved closer to LV Qinghan. Zhou Tong didn't mind seeing this. He believed that as long as there was a slight opening, he could completely take Zither Fairy down. I actually know that junior sister's heart belongs to someone. After all, who wouldn't admire someone like the Sword Master? Zhou Tong praised. LV Qinghan was a little surprised. One had to know that Yi Guqin had killed Ji Yen, and he was also the object of Zither Fairy's affection. She didn't expect that Zhou Tong not only did not slander him, but instead praised him. But hearing Zhou Tong praise Yi Guqin, Zither Fairy's expression also eased. Zhou Tong glanced at her, and his heart became even colder, but on the surface, there was a smile. To be honest, it is my life's regret that I didn't see the Sword Master's demeanor with my own eyes. If he was still alive, I would really like to exchange pointers with him. What a pity, the heavens are jealous of heroes. Such a person actually fell in the Void Sword realm. Zhou Tong sighed, as if the one who died was his own brother. Hearing this, Zither Fairy's eyes turned slightly red, and she felt a sharp pain in her heart. Junior sister, you have to be more open-minded. The dead can't be revived. If the Sword Master was still alive, he wouldn't want to see you so sad. Zhou Tong's words were gentle and carried concern. If it was any other woman, they would probably be intoxicated by Zhou Tong's gentleness. But in Zither Fairy's heart, there was only an even more bone-piercing sadness. Junior sister, people have to look forward. You can't live in the past. Zhou Tong treats you so sincerely, can you still turn a blind eye? LV Qinghan continued to persuade. No. Zither Fairy can't forget Lord Yi, and I don't want to forget. Zither Fairy shook her head, bit her red lips, and said in a sorrowful tone. Junior sister, I also don't want you to linger in the past. The Sword Master can't become a shadow in your heart. Zhou Tong's words seemed gentle, but they were pressing. No, how can Lord Yi be a shadow in my heart? Zither Fairy's face became even paler. Junior sister, you're already possessed. What's the point of continuing to think about the dead? LV Qinghan also continued to emphasize her tone. She just didn't understand. No matter how outstanding Yi Guqin was, he was still a dead person. Why was Zither Fairy so obsessed with a dead person? Zither Fairy was a little desperate, and her emotions were about to collapse. She covered her face and wept. And just when Zhou Tong and LV Qinghan wanted to continue speaking, suddenly, a chopstick, with lightning speed, flew directly towards Zhou Tong. Who? Zhou Tong's reaction was also extremely fast. He unfolded the folding fan in his hand, wanting to send the chopstick flying. But that chopstick actually contained a trace of fierce true energy, and with a bang, it directly exploded. Zhou Tong let out a muffled groan, and actually took several steps back. His eyes were filled with astonishment as he stared fixedly in that direction. Everyone here, including LV Qinghan, was stunned by this sudden scene. One of the three little emperors, Zhou Tong, was actually beaten back. And it was also at this moment that a voice sounded. Although I don't like Yi Guqin, isn't someone you can casually criticize. The black-clothed youth sitting alone by the window drinking wine said coldly. Chapter 390. Everyone's hearts were filled with shock. Zhou Tong was a disciple personally taught by a divine palace expert from the three palaces. It could be said that Zhou Tong was ranked at the top of the younger generation in the Saint Origin dynasty. He wasn't someone that anyone could provoke. But now, The black-clothed youth drinking wine by the window casually used a chopstick to push Zhou Tong back a few steps. This level of cultivation and strength caused everyone to be somewhat stunned. Zhou Tong's face turned solemn as he stared at the black-clothed youth. The youth's facial features were cold, his lips thin, and his face indifferent. "May I ask which sect you're from?" Zhou Tong's thoughts were deep, and he didn't show any obvious anger. Instead, he greeted him with respect and cupped his fists. He looked at the black-clothed youth and searched his mind for the young heaven prides of the 7 major forces. But there wasn't a single heaven pride that matched the black-clothed youth's appearance. "Is this person not from the 7 major forces?" Zhou Tong frowned slightly. "I'm just a nobody. I just can't stand you guys forcing this girl and your casual evaluation of the Dead Sword sect." The black-clothed youth's tone was cold. "Young master, we're not forcing you, but stating a fact. But if you attack Zhou Tong again, Qinghan won't just stand by and watch." LV Qinghan stepped forward, her delicate body faintly emitting an oppressive aura. As a top heaven pride of the Consonance Palace, she was stronger than Zhou Tong. "Senior sister, forget it," Zither Fairy said in a low voice. "Heh, senior sister, you don't have to be like this. If you're interested, why don't we have a drink together? I'll treat you, and it's naturally better if we can become friends." Zhou Tong smiled, his tone was very warm. Seeing Zhou Tong's attitude, the surrounding people secretly nodded in admiration. He was suddenly targeted, but he didn't get angry and instead invited with respect. Not everyone had this kind of magnanimity. But they didn't see the trace of haze in Zhou Tong's eyes. "I'll make a conclusion after I find out your background. If you have a strong background, it's naturally best to form a good relationship with you. If you don't, then—" Zhou Tong's heart was cold. "Sorry, I'm not interested in making friends with hypocrites. My interest in drinking has been ruined by you." The black-clothed youth put down the cup in his hand and turned to leave. Zhou Tong's face sank slightly. LV Qinghan, on the other hand, frowned and said in a slightly cold tone, "You suddenly attacked and slandered me like this. Do you want to leave at will now?" After LV Qinghan finished speaking, her lotus steps flashed as she directly rushed towards the black-clothed youth. After which, her jade-like palm struck out. A powerful surge of Zhenqi condensed in the center of his palm. Then, it gushed out as if it had turned into plum blossoms. It's the Consonance Palace's top-grade spirit martial art, Falling Plum Palm. There was no lack of geniuses from the 7 major forces around, and they immediately recognized LV Qinghan's move. With her Divine Soul 9 transformations cultivation, the might of a top-grade spirit-level martial art was absolutely not something that anyone could withstand. However, in the face of LV Qinghan's extreme move, the black-clothed youth's gaze remained indifferent. He only stretched out his palm and did not use any martial arts. Vigorous and violent true qi surged and collided with LV Qinghan's jade palm. Bang! His true qi burst out, and the surrounding tables were overturned. The black-clothed youth did not take a single step back, but LV Qinghan took 3 steps back. Zhou Tong's eyes suddenly narrowed, and the onlookers were also shocked. The black-clothed youth who had mysteriously appeared had actually pushed LV Qinghan back with a single palm. LV Qinghan was one of the top geniuses, and it was difficult to find a match for her in the younger generation of the Saint Origin dynasty. "Who are you?" LV Qinghan frowned, and ripples were set off in her heart. Are the geniuses of the Saint Origin dynasty all frogs at the bottom of a well? With such cultivation, how dare you judge others? Even if the sword master is dead, what right do you have to judge others? The black-clothed youth's tone was indifferent and cold. Even a cold and indifferent fairy like LV Qinghan could not help but reveal a trace of embarrassment when she heard this. However, they understood the meaning of the youth's words. "So you're not from the Saint Origin dynasty?" Zhou Tong's tone was a little solemn. If it was such a person, it would not be good for him to offend. "I wonder if this young master is related to young Master Yi?" Zither Fairy stepped forward. The black-clothed youth in front of her was so protective of Yi Guchen's reputation, causing Zither Fairy to reveal a trace of hope. Perhaps Yi Guchen was not dead, and was hiding somewhere. The black-clothed youth ignored Zhou Tong, and glanced at Zither Fairy, and said indifferently, "It has nothing to do with him." After the youth finished speaking, he casually threw a crystal jade as payment for the wine. True chi surged behind his back, and a pair of pitch-black eagle wings spread out. He directly flew out of the window on the top floor. Hidden gate of life and death. Seeing the youth fly out, many people in the surroundings burst out in shock. However, LV Qinghan and Zhou Tong knew that it should be some kind of secret flying technique. "Senior sister, young Master Zhou, I'll go back and rest first," Zither Fairy said in a low voice and was about to leave. After such a thing happened, Zhou Tong and LV Qinghan lost their interest. However, Zhou Tong still smiled faintly and said, "Although this gathering was disturbed by outsiders, it doesn't matter. When I get into the top 3 in the exchange, I'll invite junior sister and senior sister LV to have a gathering together," Zhou Tong said as he gracefully waved his folding fan. "When the time comes, I'll definitely bring junior sister." LV Qinghan nodded slightly. However, in her heart, she was still upset about being defeated by the black-clothed youth. Looking at LV Qinghan and Zither Fairy's departing figures, the smile on Zhou Tong's face slowly disappeared. How annoying. However, I'll completely reveal my strength at the exchange and get into the top 3. At that time, Zither Fairy will know how stupid it is to yearn for a dead person day and night. Zhou Tong's eyes reflected a cold light. At the exchange, there were also people like Xian Hao and demonic blade Leng Ju, so Zhou Tong did not dare to say that he could get first place. However, as long as he could get into the top 3, he would be satisfied. Zhou Tong pondered in his heart, and also left House Yunyan. Outside House Yunyan, in the sky above northern Liang City, the black-clothed youth's face was like ice, unchanging for eternity. "Yi Guchen, it seems that you're really dead." This black-clothed youth was none other than Su Moyan, who came from Lotus Village. Although he had already received news of Yi Guchen's death, Su Moyan still wanted to confirm it first. That was why he came to northern Liang City, where the 7 major forces gathered. If Yi Guchen was still alive, then he would definitely follow the Sword Sect's tower to northern Liang City. However, what disappointed Su Moyan was that after staying in northern Liang City for a few days, he did not find any news about Yi Guchen. Even in the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest, no one talked about Yi Guchen. Thus, Su Moyan confirmed that Yi Guchen was really dead. "Yi Guchen, you've really disappointed junior sister. However, the only one who can save junior sister is me." Su Moyan looked into the distance and directly flew out of northern Liang City. A day after Su Moyan left northern Liang City. At the city gate of northern Liang City, there were 4 travel-worn figures. They were Yi Guchen, Xiao Lai, and the others. Chapter 391. After leaving the heavenly moat gorge, they traveled for another 2 days. Yi Guchen and company finally arrived at northern Liang City. Looking at the majestic city in front of her, Madame Xiao dismounted from her horse and collapsed on the ground. She was so emotional that she cried happily. "We finally arrived at northern Liang City. Our bitter days are finally over." Madame Xiao cried tears of joy. Xiao Wanru and Xiao Lai were also emotional. "Little brother, I can't thank you enough for saving my life. If you need anything in the future, I, Xiao Lai, am willing to do anything for you." Xiao Lai solemnly cupped his hands and thanked Yi Guchen. Wanru also thanks young master for escorting us. Xiao Wanru bowed towards Yi Guchen. Although Xiao Wanru had become much colder towards Yi Guchen due to Madame Zhao's guidance. However, she still felt grateful in her heart. "It's all right, it was convenient." Yi Guchen waved his hand and did not ask for anything in return. Madame Xiao, who was standing at the side, glanced at Yi Guchen after she had calmed down. A faint smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. "Young man, if you want favors, just say it. Why do you have to beat around the bush and pretend to be indifferent? To be honest, being able to introduce you to the Shentu family and becoming their guard is already very good. What else do you want?" Madame Xiao put her hands on her hips and shook her head as she sighed. She seemed to think that Yi Guchen was rejecting her because he was greedy and wanted more. "Madame Xiao Lai sighed deeply and felt very helpless. "Mother, Since young master is not willing to join the Shintu family, then forget it. Xiao Wanru spoke at the right time. Yi Guqin ignored Madame Xiao and looked at Xiao Wanru instead. He thought of that night when they were by the bonfire. The girl's eyes were filled with longing and disappointment. Marrying someone you don't like is indeed a kind of cruelty. Yi Guqin hesitated for a moment before taking out a jade scroll and handing it to Xiao Wanru. This is... Xiao Wanru's beautiful eyes were filled with doubt. If there's something you can't solve, crush the jade slip. Perhaps I can help you once. Yi Guqin's tone was indifferent. As soon as he finished speaking, Madame Xiao could not help but laugh. Brat, who do you think you are? Although your strength is not bad, my Wanru will have a noble status in the future. Why would she need your help? Madame Xiao felt that Yi Guqin's behavior was laughable. He was overestimating himself. Yi Guqin ignored Madame Xiao and just looked at Xiao Wanru indifferently. Xiao Wanru held the jade slip in her hand with a complicated expression. Looking at Xiao Wanru's absent-minded appearance, Madame Xiao frowned. He could not let Xiao Wanru meet Shintu Miao in this state. Wanru, quickly throw this jade slip away. Madame Xiao ordered. Well. Xiao Wanru bit her red lips and was at a loss for a moment. Madam, you've gone too far. Xiao Lai said with a frown. Madame Xiao actually said this in front of Yi Guqin. Wasn't this embarrassing for Yi Guqin? What do you mean? I'm thinking for Wanru. As Shintu Miao's wife, how can she keep another man's keepsake? Wanru, listen to me and throw this jade slip away, Madame Xiao scolded. Xiao Wanru was at a loss. She recalled Yi Guqin's slander of the sword sect that night, coupled with Madame Xiao's subtle influence. In the end, Xiao Wanru gritted her teeth slightly and looked at Yi Guqin. She said apologetically, I'm sorry, young Master Yi. Thank you for your help along the way. But as expected, we are not fated to be together. We are not from the same world. In the future, she would be the young madam of a great family. Although the masked youth in front of her was strong, he was still ordinary. Xiao Wanru treated the youth in front of her as a passerby in her life and did not miss him. Yi Guqin looked deeply at Xiao Wanru and said indifferently, This is your own choice. Don't regret it. Madame Xiao saw this and immediately snatched the jade slip from Xiao Wanru's hand and threw it into the smelly ditch beside the city gate. Kid, Wanru has nothing to do with you anymore. Madame Xiao said expressionlessly. Yi Guqin did not say anything. He cupped his fists slightly at Xiao Lai and left. What's with this kid's attitude? He thinks he's someone just because he has a little bit of strength. Madame Xiao rolled her eyes at Yi Guqin and turned to Xiao Wanru with a smile. Wanru, you will definitely be grateful to me in the future for helping you make the best decision. Is that so? Xiao Wanru's beautiful eyes showed a trace of confusion. It's fine if you're snobbish, but you actually taught your daughter to be like this? Xiao Lai shook his head and sighed. He was a little disappointed and felt that Xiao Wanru seemed to have made an extremely wrong choice. I'm letting my daughter see the truth. Let's not talk about this for now. Let's go to the Shintu family quickly. The day of meteoric success is just around the corner. Madame Xiao smiled proudly and could not wait. Xiao Wanru also followed behind as if she had accepted her fate. On the other side, Yi Guqin, who had entered northern Liang City, did not take Xiao Wanru's matter to heart. He was also not in a hurry to go to the inn where the Sword Sect's Pagoda Forest disciples were. Instead, he found a place to stay. The battle between the top prodigies had not started yet, so Yi Guqin was not in a hurry. After adjusting his breathing and recovering his tired spirit, Yi Guqin was also prepared to inquire about the current situation between the 7 major forces and the barbarian race. And in this inquiry, Yi Guqin also received a piece of news that surprised him. After the 7 major forces exchange, the Shintu family would hold the wedding of Shintu Miao and Gongsun Xiaoye. Gongsun Xiaoye? Isn't that Xiao Wanru? Yi Guqin was puzzled. Compared to a small family like the Xiao family, the Gongsun family was a true superfamily in the Great Desolate Prefecture, and was on the same level as the Shintu family. Gongsun Xiaoye was also a prodigy of the Consonance Palace. Although she was not as good as LV Qinghan, she was not far behind. What caught Yi Guchen's attention was that the Gongsun family was a family of blacksmiths, and Gongsun Xiaoye was a genius in blacksmithing. Hey, have you heard? Gongsun Xiaoye from the Gongsun family will hold a blacksmithing convention at the gem forging building tomorrow. From what she said, if there is a younger generation that can surpass her in blacksmithing, they will be able to obtain all kinds of treasured materials, and even the rare snow clay fetus. Snow clay fetus is the kind of supreme treasure that can repair most damaged divine weapons? Yes, I heard that even mystical pattern divine weapons can be repaired with snow clay fetus. In a bustling city, Yi Guchen's eyes lit up when he heard this. He was wearing a bamboo hat and covering his face. Although his blood hell sword and heavenly demon general armor had the blood spirit array, they required a large amount of killing and absorbing blood essence to repair, so their recovery speed was not fast. However, if he had snow clay fetus, Yi Guchen could at least guarantee that the recovery of the two divine weapons would be accelerated. A blacksmithing competition? Yi Guchen thought. Not to mention that he was familiar with swords as a sword cultivator, he had learned from the old drunkard for a while in the Sky River province. Yi Guchen did not know the details of the old drunkard. However, he knew that the old drunkard was at least a 5-star blacksmith, or even higher. It could be said that even the Gongsun family, which specialized in blacksmithing, did not have a 5-star blacksmith. Therefore, Yi Guchen still had some confidence in the blacksmithing convention held by Gongsun Xiaoye. His broken meteorite soft sword was a fine product of 100,000 refinements. If not for the low quality of the material, it would not have been broken so easily. I was able to forge 100,000 refinements when I was in the Qi refinement realm. I wonder what level I can reach now. Can Gongsun Xiaoye reach tens of thousands of refinements? Yi Guchen was curious. Yi Guchen was determined to get the snow clay fetus that could repair the blood hell sword and heavenly demon general armor. Chapter 392. Just as Yi Guchen was preparing for the blacksmith general assembly, Madame Xiao and the rest rushed to the Shintu family's residence impatiently. As the main residence of the Shintu family, Northern Liang City's residence was naturally magnificent. From afar, a huge residence that occupied a vast area could be seen. It was extremely spacious, with pavilions, terraces, and richly ornamented rafters. At the entrance were 2 stone lions that were 30 feet tall. They were extremely domineering, revealing the deep heritage of a super family. Do you see that? This is a super family. Just the entrance is several times bigger than our Xiao family. Madame Xiao straightened her back, grinning from ear to ear. Beside her, Xiao Lai's face also revealed a slight smile. Xiao Wanru was originally very resistant to marrying Shinta Miao, and even felt very wronged. However, looking at the magnificent residence in front of her, the grievance in her heart lessened slightly. I was still thinking of breaking off the engagement. Looking at it now, I was indeed naive. Xiao Wanru suddenly felt that marrying Shinta Miao might not be a particularly bad thing. The 3 of them walked to the entrance of the residence and found 2 Shintu family guards standing guard at the entrance. May I ask where young Master Shintu is? Madame Xiao asked indifferently. It was as if she was already the old madam of the Shintu family. Who are you? One of the guards cast a sidelong glance at Madame Xiao. Madame Xiao and the rest had fled all the way here. When they reached Northern Liang City, they could not wait any longer. They did not even wash up before rushing over in a hurry. Hence, at this moment, the 3 of them were covered in dirt and dust. Madame Xiao's injured shoulder was bandaged, and she looked rather miserable. How dare you? Are you blind? You don't even recognize the old madam? I can ask young Master Shinta Miao to chase you out of the Shintu family with just 1 word. Madame Xiao frowned and put her hands on her waist when she saw the guard's sloppy attitude. Damn it, where did this crazy woman come from? As a guard of the Shintu family, he had never been provoked like this. The guard's footsteps flashed, and he appeared in front of Madame Xiao, slapping her. But this slap was extremely heavy, and it sent Madame Xiao flying 30 feet away. A few of her teeth fell out, and half of her face was red and swollen. You're rebelling. Madame Xiao covered her face and cried out in pain. What are you doing? Just as Xiao Lai was about to step forward, another guard immediately stopped him. The guard who had hit Madame Xiao stood in front of her again. Put, put, put. 4 or 5 slaps were delivered to Madame Xiao's face, making her dizzy and seeing stars. Both her cheeks were completely swollen. Stop! Don't treat my mother like this! Xiao Wanru cried out when she saw this. Hey, this girl's skin is not bad. A strange light appeared in the guard's eyes as he looked at Xiao Wanru. Although Xiao Wanru was also travel-worn, her face was elegant and beautiful, making people's eyes light up. Xiao Wanru took a few steps back. She was terrified. But why did this happen? They were here to form a marriage alliance, so how did they end up like this? Right at this moment, a voice suddenly sounded from nearby. What are you doing? Stop. The 2 guards glanced over and instantly stopped. They bowed and said, Greetings, young master. A young man with a stocky build, who resembled Shinta Miao, walked over. He was one of Shinta Miao's cousins, Shinta Yuan. You are from the Xiao family? Shinta Yuan glanced at Madame Xiao and the others and asked in surprise. He had occasionally heard Shinta Miao talk about the Xiao family, so he recognized them at this moment. Yes. This young master has a discerning eye. Our Wanru is young master Shinta Miao's fiancée. She came here today to fulfill the marriage agreement. These 2 bastards actually stopped us and even hit us. Please punish them, young master. Madame Xiao said flatteringly to Shinta Yuan while glaring fiercely at the 2 guards. The faces of the 2 guards paled. They looked at each other with fear in their eyes. Could it be that they had really offended a big shot? However, after hearing Madame Xiao's words, Shinta Yuan had a strange look in his eyes. He hesitated for a moment and asked, Haven't you heard of a piece of news in northern Liang City? What news? Madame Xiao asked subconsciously. My cousin, Shinta Miao, will soon marry the pearl of the Gongsun family, Gongsun Xiaoye, Shinta Yuan said lightly. What? Madame Xiao froze on the spot as if she had been struck by lightning. She did not recover for a moment. Xiao Lai also took 2 steps back, his eyes filled with disbelief. As for Xiao Wanru, her face was even paler. She clenched her jade-like hands tightly. Could it be a mistake? How could it be? My husband has an agreement with that old master Shintu, Madame Xiao said with trembling lips. The Gongsun family is a super family. How can your small Xiao family compare to it? Shinta Yuan frowned slightly. It's my fault. However, can you help introduce us to young master Shinta Miao? Madame Xiao slapped herself and continued to beg. Shinta Yuan glanced at Xiao Wanru casually and said lightly, Follow me. Madame Xiao's swollen face lit up. As long as she could see Shinta Miao, there was still hope. Shinta Yuan brought the 3 people from the Xiao family into the mansion. The 2 guards, however, heaved a sigh of relief. TSK, I thought it was some big shot. Turns out it's just a few dogs who want to suck up to the Shinta family, the guard said disdainfully. After entering the mansion, Shinta Yuan brought the 3 people to a spacious courtyard. The courtyard was full of spirit energy. It was obviously an excellent place to cultivate. A muscular man with a bare upper body was waving a saber that was as tall as a person. He was cultivating. It was Shinta Miao. Cousin, the Xiao family is here. Shinta Yuan left immediately after speaking. Shinta Miao put down the saber in his hand and glanced casually at the 3 people from the Xiao family. Young Master Shinta Miao, I've brought my Wanru here to fulfill the marriage agreement. Madame Xiao held Xiao Wanru's jade-like hand and walked forward. Shinta Miao looked at Xiao Wanru. Although she was covered in dust, it could not hide her natural beauty. She had the temperament of a lady from a respectable family. Xiao Wanru lowered her head, not daring to look at Shinta Miao. His muscular body and demonic markings, coupled with his rough appearance, made Xiao Wanru feel disgusted, but she did not dare to say anything. Then sure. Shinta Miao nodded with satisfaction. Although he did not like a small family like the Xiao family, Xiao Wanru was indeed beautiful and charming. Then young Master Shintu, about the wedding? Madame Xiao was delighted when she saw Shinta Miao's satisfied expression. My wedding with Xiaoye will be after the exchange of the 7 major forces. Since you guys are here, let's do it together, Shinta Miao said calmly. Together? What do you mean? Madame Xiao did not react. Xiao Lai, however, frowned. Nothing. My wife is Gongsun Xiaoye of the Gongsun family. As for Xiao Wanru, she's only fit to be my concubine. Shinta Miao's words caused the 3 people from the Xiao family to freeze on the spot. Xiao Wanru raised her head abruptly, a trace of shame and anger in her eyes. Chapter 393. No matter what, Xiao Wanru had learned the 4 arts since she was young. She was a well-educated lady. A woman like her should be the main wife at the very least. Being someone else's concubine was a form of humiliation. Young Master Shintu, why do you have to humiliate Wanru like this? Xiao Wanru clenched her fists tightly. Her delicate body trembled with shame and anger. No matter how small the Xiao family was, it was still a family. Xiao Wanru was a proper lady. Xiao Wanru had been unwilling to marry Shinta Miao as his main wife. Moreover, she was now a concubine. The status of a concubine was much lower than that of a main wife. To put it bluntly, she was no different from a concubine. In front of the main wife, she was just a servant. Shinta Miao frowned slightly at Xiao Wanru's words. Wanru, don't say anything. Madame Xiao tugged at Xiao Wanru. Xiao Lai suppressed his anger and stepped forward. Young Master Shintu, your father and I are friends. He promised that Wanru would be your wife in the future, not a concubine. You really don't know how to be content. You dare to be presumptuous in the Shintu family just because of some small favor. To be honest, this is also my father's intention. Your Xiao family is worthless compared to the Gongsun family. Shinta Miao said disdainfully as he glanced coldly at Xiao Lai. The Gongsun family was a super family and a family of blacksmiths. Shinta Miao and Gongsun Xiaoye's marriage was utilitarian. It would benefit both families. What about the Xiao family? A small family in Wuyan City that had almost been wiped out by the blood barbarians. Only the 3 of them were left. There was no comparison between the 2. Shinta Miao could not give up on Gongsun Xiaoye because of Xiao Wanru. With Gongsun Xiaoye's status, how could she be a concubine? Xiao Lai's chest heaved. He was obviously furious. Xiao Wanru's eyes were red. She felt greatly humiliated, and her delicate body trembled. Young Master Shintu, Wanru did not want to marry you. I originally wanted to break off the engagement. Since that's the case, it's just as well. Xiao Wanru said through clenched teeth. Humph. Shintu Tong snorted coldly, clearly angry. Wanru, shut up. Madame Xiao slapped Xiao Wan's soft and jade-like face, and a bright red palm print instantly appeared on her fair face. Mother, you hit me? Xiao Wanru covered her face in a daze, unable to regain her senses for a moment. Being able to receive young Master Shintu's favor is your good fortune from your previous life. Being his concubine is already very good. Hurry up and apologize to young Master Shintu and agree to be his concubine. Madame Zhao's hands were trembling, but she still spoke. Xiao Wanru looked at Xiao Lai on the other side. Xiao Lai also lowered his head in pain. With nowhere else to go, the 3 of them could only rely on the Shintu family. There was no other way. Therefore, Yiguchen did not have the slightest intention of underestimating her. He walked to the front of the gem forging building and asked about the blacksmith convention. The registration fee of 20,000 crystal jades. The person in charge of the registration area said lightly. Generally speaking, most blacksmiths who knew a little about blacksmithing had accumulated some wealth. Therefore, such an expensive registration fee could also filter out a group of people who wanted to fish in troubled waters. Yiguchen did not mind. He took out 20,000 crystal jades and directly entered the gem forging building. The gem forging building was grand and bustling with people. In the central hall, there were many stone platforms. On the stone platforms, different types of ores and metals were placed according to their categories. An old man walked out of the crowd and said loudly, The gem forging building is honored that all the blacksmiths have come to participate in Miss Gongsuen's blacksmith convention. Without further ado, I will now announce the rules. Miss Gongsun wants to compete with the real elite blacksmiths, so before that, there will be a test. The test is divided into 2 stages. The first stage is to identify materials, and the second stage is to select materials. The ores and metals on the stone platforms in front of you are the materials you need to identify. Each person can identify 10 types, and as long as 7 types are correct, you can enter the second stage, the old man said. As soon as he said that, many of the participating blacksmiths started to discuss. Most of them thought that the stage was too simple. Only Yi Guchen frowned secretly. He thought that Gongsun Xiaoye's test was definitely not that simple. Just at this moment, a loud and clear laughter suddenly rang out. "I'm late. I hope that cousin-in-law will not take offense." A stocky man walked over from the crowd. There were 3 people behind him. This man was Shintu Yuan, who had led Xiao Lai and the others. He was also Shintu Miao's cousin. The 3 people behind him were Xiao Lai, Madame Xiao, and Xiao Wanru. They casually swept their gazes and saw Yi Guchen among the participants. Why are they here? Yi Guchen also saw them. Chapter 394. At the same time that Yi Guchen saw Xiao Lai and the others, Xiao Lai and the others also saw Yi Guchen. "What are you doing here, little brother?" Xiao Lai was surprised. "What is that brat doing in a place like this?" Madame Xiao glanced at Yi Guchen. She was a little surprised. Only Xiao Wanru felt a little guilty, not daring to meet Yi Guchen's gaze. She lowered her head slightly, her eyelids drooping. Now that she was about to become Shintu Miao's concubine, how could she face Yi Guchen? However, Madame Xiao had already instructed Xiao Wanru to build a good relationship with Gongsun Xiaoye, so Xiao Wanru had no choice but to come. After Shintu Yuan and the others arrived, there was a curtain on the 2nd floor of the pavilion. A delicate voice sounded from behind the curtain. "Who's your cousin-in-law? Watch your mouth." The owner of this delicate voice was the pearl of the Gongsun family, Gongsun Xiaoye. At the same time, she was also a forging genius. However, Gongsun Xiaoye's reputation was matched by her lawless and fierce personality. She was known as the Gongsun family's little chili pepper. Therefore, no one was surprised that Gongsun Xiaoye spoke so rudely. Shintu Yuan did not mind. He laughed and said, "Although Miss Gongsun is not now, you will be soon." The person I like is a forging genius. That Shintu Miao is an idiot in this aspect. If father did not force me, who would want to marry that rough man? Gongsun Xiaoye's arrogant voice sounded from behind the curtain. Everyone in the pavilion was a little embarrassed when they heard that. Only Gongsun Xiaoye dared to casually call Shintu Miao an idiot. However, this caused Xiao Wanru's mood to become even more bitter. With Gongsun Xiaoye's status, she could despise and even insult Shintu Miao. On the other hand, she was only fit to be a concubine and could not complain at all. The disparity was too great. Shintu Yuan smiled and shook his head. He knew Gongsun Xiaoye's personality, so he did not care. "I'm just here to participate in the blacksmith convention. Miss Gongsun, you won't be so rude, right? That's up to you. If you can beat me in forging, then I won't marry Shintu Miao." "I'll marry you." Gongsun Xiaoye's words shocked everyone to death, once again shocking everyone. I wouldn't dare. Shintu Yuan's forehead was covered in sweat as he hurriedly waved his hands. Gongsun Xiaoye was indeed the little pepper of the Gongsun family. She dared to say anything. Next, the first round of talent identification officially began. Yi Guchen, Shintu Yuan, and all the participating blacksmiths stood in front of a stone platform. When they saw that Yi Guchen was also standing in front of the stone stage with the other participants, Xiao Lai and the others were very surprised. "I couldn't tell that little brother is actually an artificer?" Xiao Lai sighed. "What blacksmith?" "That kid's strength is not bad, but I don't believe that he is also proficient in blacksmithing. Maybe he just wants to admire Miss Gongsuen's elegance." Madame Xiao curled her lips. For some reason, Xiao Wanru felt even more disappointed when she heard Madame Zhao's words. So he came to participate in the competition because he wants to see Miss Gongsuen's beauty? Xiao Wanru was a little disappointed. At this moment, she felt that Yi Guchen was no different from those ordinary people. With Yi Guchen's sharp senses, he naturally heard what Madame Xiao and the others were saying. However, he didn't have to explain anything, and he didn't mind. Yi Guchen looked at the metal ore on the stone platform in front of him. It was a square-shaped stone with specks of star-like light mixed within. When Yi Guchen was forging the soft sword with the old drunkard had taught Yi Guchen a lot of knowledge about forging in his spare time. Among them was a book called Heavenly Works Mineral Collection. It recorded almost all the ore information in the South Horizon region and even the entire 9 regions. This kind of information was extremely rare. In the entire Saint Yuan dynasty, the information about ores in this book was probably only a few tenths of what was in the Heavenly Works Mineral Collection. Yi Guchen had also read it when he was free, so he had accumulated a lot of knowledge. "This is the star spot stone," Yi Guchen said. An attendant recorded the answer, took the star spot stone, and placed a new piece of metal on the platform. The results would only be announced after all the materials were identified. The rest of the participants were the same. "This is too easy. Looks like Miss Gongsun wants us to pass." The participating blacksmiths all heaved a sigh of relief. They were very relaxed and chatted casually. It was obvious that identifying these stones was very easy in their eyes. Shen Tuyuan was the fastest to identify the stones among this group of people. He had already identified the 5th piece. However, after the 5th piece, Shen Tuyuan began to frown and ponder. It wasn't just Shen Tuyuan. The rest of the blacksmiths were the same. After the 5th piece, the difficulties seemed to increase by a lot. "This should be a fire obsidian. This is a demon essence crystal." A young blacksmith who was rather famous, in a hurry to win, directly spoke up and identified the 10 materials. However, in the end, the results were announced. This blacksmith identified all 5 materials incorrectly. In the identification round, 7 out of 10 materials had to be identified correctly in order to pass. Therefore, he was directly eliminated. What an idiot! When identifying materials, the most important thing is to guard against arrogance and rashness. Is he worthy of being called a blacksmith? Gongsun Xiaoye's disdainful snort came from behind the pavilion's curtain. When this was said, the rest of the blacksmiths were even more alarmed. They didn't dare to be impatient and identified the materials very carefully. Even Shen Tuyuan slowed down and picked up the minerals to identify them carefully. "Junior sister, this question of yours isn't simple." Another woman's voice came from behind the curtain. However, it was only a whisper, and no one below heard it. This cold and smooth voice belonged to LV Qinghan. "Hee, the minerals at the back were taken from the family's treasury. Only the old men in the family can identify them. However, senior sister LV, who do you think is the most qualified to compete with me?" Gongsun Xiaoye giggled. "It should only be Shen Tuyuan. Although his cultivation isn't high, in terms of blacksmithing, he can be said to be the best in the younger generation of the Shentu family. Otherwise, he wouldn't have the confidence to participate in the competition." LV Qinghan said lightly. "Is that so? Then let's wait and see. However, it's a pity that Sister Qin didn't come to watch the show." Gongsun Xiaoye said. "It's fine. She just can't get over it and can't get rid of the influence Yi Guchen had on her. She will figure it out in the future." LV Qinghan said. "I also want to see that sword master. It's a pity." Gongsun Xiaoye said regretfully. At this moment, there was a sudden commotion from the crowd below. "What's going on?" Gongsun Xiaoye and LV Qinghan both looked over. Hasn't this kid learned a lesson from the mistakes of others? He probably wants to finish quickly and get first place to attract Miss Gongsuen's attention. Ridiculous. The materials at the back are so difficult to identify, but he can still identify them so quickly. He's probably just guessing. There were many blacksmiths whispering around. It turned out that it was because Yi Guchen maintained the same speed as before. While the others were still identifying the 5th and 6th pieces, Yi Guchen had already identified the 8th piece. That was why he attracted the attention of the surrounding people. Chapter 395. That young blacksmith from before had wanted to attract Gongsun Xiaoye's attention. He was in a hurry to get first place, so he was eliminated. Hence, the other blacksmiths did not dare to be careless, and identified them very carefully. Even a talented forging genius like Shen Tuyuan had only managed to identify the seventh piece. Hence, Yi Guqin's performance was very outstanding. Shen Tuyuan frowned and said, "The path of blacksmithing requires a calm heart. If you are so anxious and impatient, how can you achieve greatness?" Shen Tuyuan was the most capable blacksmith among the young blacksmiths here. Hence, when he spoke, many people agreed with him. Yi Guqin frowned slightly. From Shen Tuyuan's tone, it sounded like the older generation reprimanding the younger generation. However, it was indeed not too difficult for Yi Guqin to identify these materials. He did not need to spend so much time. These materials that were difficult for ordinary blacksmiths to identify were all recorded in the Heavenly Works mineral collection. As long as he recalled and compared them, he would be able to identify them. Hence, Yi Guqin had maintained such a speed. However, why did it become impatient in Shen Tuyuan's eyes? Seeing that Yi Guqin did not listen to him, Shen Tuyuan shook his head and said, "Rotten wood cannot be carved. Such advice is useless. You are destined to not go far on the path of blacksmithing." "What does my business have to do with you?" Yi Guqin frowned slightly. Even a clay figurine would have some anger. Furthermore, Shen Tuyuan did not know Yi Guqin's ability. His casual words were annoying. "Young Master Shentu, please don't mind him. That kid is such a person. Previously, he had escorted us all the way to northern Liang City. He was arrogant and thought that he was great." At this moment, Lady Xiao stood out and sneered with her hands on her hips. Lady Xiao spared no effort to please the people of the Shentu family. "Oh, there's such a thing?" Shen Tuyuan was surprised. "That's right. This kid's life is cheap, but his heart is higher than the sky. I kindly introduced him to become a guard of the Shentu family, but he ignored me." Lady Xiao snorted. "No wonder he has such a personality." Shen Tuyuan shook his head. Madame Zhao's voice was very loud and almost everyone in the gem forging building heard it. "What? This kid is just a guard? A guard dares to compete with us blacksmiths on the same stage." Some of the blacksmiths were shocked, and then they felt insulted. They heard from Madame Xiao that Yi Guqin had escorted them all the way, so they immediately treated Yi Guqin as a guard. "Madam, just shut up," Xiao Lai shouted. Even he couldn't bear to watch any longer. Xiao Wanru also sighed. Madame Zhao's words in public undoubtedly put Yi Guqin on the spot. "Interesting, very interesting." Behind the curtain, Gongsun Xiaoye also clapped and laughed. The situation was getting more and more interesting. However, Yi Guqin ignored the discussions around him and the strange gazes directed at him. He had already identified the last material. There's actually a precious material like meteorite sand? Yi Guqin was slightly surprised. A precious material like meteorite sand could be used to forge a high-grade mystical weapon. In the Saint Origin dynasty, such a material was almost extinct. Probably not many people would be able to recognize it. However, Yi Guqin recognized it. He directly called the attendant beside him and gave him the answer. "This kid has already identified it." "So fast?" "I'm afraid he didn't guess it blindly. I have never seen his last material before." Seeing that Yi Guqin had finished identifying it, there was an uproar again. "Just wait to be kicked out." Shen Tuyuan snorted coldly. He had already identified the ninth piece. On the other side, the attendant took out a list and compared it. He frowned and then said, 10 pieces of material, all wrong." "What? All wrong? Did I hear wrongly?" "All wrong. This kid is really just a guard. He only did this to attract Miss Gongsuan's attention." When the attendant reported the result, the entire gem forging building was in an uproar. No matter how bad the blacksmiths who had been eliminated were, they could at least identify 4 or 5 ores. However, Yi Guqin was completely wrong. Madame Xiao was grinning from ear to ear and spared no effort in mocking him. The corner of Shin Tae-yuan's mouth curled into a sneer as he shook his head. This result was within his expectations. However, Yi-gu-chin, who was under the bamboo hat and veil, frowned slightly. All wrong? How could it be? Maybe something went wrong, Yi-gu-chin said indifferently. You don't even want to admit your own failure. How sad. I, Shin Tae-yuan, really don't want to compete with someone like you. Shin Tae-yuan snorted coldly. The other contestants also jeered and looked down on Yi-gu-chin. I didn't expect Yi-gu-chin to be such a person. Xiao Wanru saw everything. She was suddenly very disappointed in Yi-gu-chin. To think that she still regretted her decision and wondered if she should find the jade slip. Now, it seemed that Madame Zhao's decision was right. What sense of responsibility did a person who was unwilling to accept his own failure and mistakes have? Someone send the guest out. At this moment, Gong Sun Xiaoya's voice came from behind the curtain. There was a hint of anger. Obviously, this little chilly thought that she had been played and was angry. She actually let random people in to compete. Tiske, you went for wool and came home shorn. This time, you even angered Miss Gong Sun. Serves you right. Many people around rolled their eyes and gloated. I can leave on my own, Yi-gu-chin said coldly. Although he did not know what misunderstanding there was, since it was already like this, Yi-gu-chin would not stay here. Although he wanted the snow clay fetus, he could not give up his dignity. And just at this moment, Shin Tae-yuan's 10 materials had been identified. The attendant in charge of Yi-gu-chin went forward and took out a list to compare. Suddenly, his face turned pale. Shin Tae-yuan straightened his back and looked very confident. Obviously, he was very confident. However, the attendant had a strange look and said, Shin Tae-yuan, all 10 materials are wrong. The smile on Shin Tae-yuan's face had just spread, but it suddenly froze. Madame Xiao and the rest, who had originally wanted to flatter and cheer, were also extremely shocked. How can it be? How can young Master Shin Tae identify all the materials incorrectly? There must be a problem. Madame Xiao was the first to stand up and speak out. That's right. How can young Master Shin Tae be all wrong? Another person echoed. Shin Tae-yuan's face was also a little gloomy. Even he himself did not believe that he was wrong. Previously, when Yi-gu-chin identified all the materials incorrectly, no one questioned. They all thought that it was natural. However, when Shin Tae-yuan identified all the materials incorrectly, everyone thought that there must be some misunderstanding. At this moment, even Gong Sun Xiaoya knew that there must be a problem. At this moment, the attendant who had announced the results took out a list to compare again. His body suddenly trembled and he said shakily, Everyone, I'm really sorry. I took out the wrong list. No wonder. I see. Everyone heaved a sigh of relief. Shin Tae-yuan's expression also relaxed, and a faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Shin Tae-yuan identified 10 materials, 8 correct, the attendant said loudly. He actually got 8 correct. Shin Tae-yuan is indeed a forging genius. The surrounding people flattered him. The smile on Shin Tae-yuan's face also gradually widened. With this result, he should be able to be ranked first. Madame Xiao spared no effort in flattering him, wantonly praising Shin Tae-yuan's amazing forging talent. However, after that, the attendant's eyes had a trace of suspicion. He opened his mouth again and said in a slightly strange tone, I have mixed up Shin Tae-yuan's list with that person's. That young man called Chin. The attendant's tone was slightly bitter, and he continued. Identified 10 materials, correct, 10. When this was said, the noisy tower of jewels fell into a dead silence. Chapter 396. In the gem forging building, both the participating blacksmiths and the surrounding spectators could not believe their ears. They couldn't quite believe their ears. As for Shin Tae-yuan, he reached out and grabbed the servant's collar. His tone was cold as he said, What did you say? Say it again. I mixed up your list with young Master Chen's list. That young master identified 10 materials, and all 10 were correct. The attendant's body trembled as he faced Shin Tae-yuan. But that was the truth and he could not lie. Are you sure? Shin Tae-yuan's tone had a hint of threat. This is indeed so. The attendant complained in his heart, but he did not dare to make another mistake. Otherwise, he would definitely be skinned alive by Lady Gongsun. I don't believe it. Shen Tuyuan pushed the attendant away fiercely and picked up the list to compare. With one look, his face became even more gloomy. Could it be true? The surrounding spectators saw this and their hearts skipped a beat. As for the participating blacksmiths, none of them were willing to believe it. They didn't believe that a kid who was born as a guard would be able to surpass them in judging talents. Even the forging genius Shen Tuyuan was not as good as him. At this moment, Yi Guchen had almost stepped out of the gem forging building's door. It was at this crucial moment that the curtain on the second floor of the building was suddenly lifted. A red, exquisite figure flew down like a swallow and chased to the entrance of the gem forging building. Lady Gongsun has appeared. There was an uproar in the gem forging building. Yi Guchen was about to step out of the door when a red figure landed in front of him and blocked his path. The person who appeared in front of Yi Guchen was a 15 or 16-year-old girl in red makeup. The girl was petite, with starry eyes, a fine nose, and an almond-shaped face. Her jet black hair was tied into 2 pigtails. Coupled with the curve of her mouth, she was obviously a pampered and unruly person. From head to toe, if there was a flaw, it would be the flat expanse of land in front of her chest. "Hey, you're called Chin, right? You're not allowed to leave," the girl in red said directly with her hands on her waist. Chen was Yi Guchen's pseudonym when he registered. He recognized at a glance that the young lady in front of him was the pearl of the Gongsun family, Gongsun Xiaoye, who was rumored to be married to Shen Tumiao. It was just that Yi Guchen found it hard to imagine the contrast between Shen Tumiao's muscular and boorish figure and Gongsun Xiaoye's petite figure. "I think you were the one who said to send the guests off." Yi Guchen's tone was still indifferent. That's because that idiot misread the list and misled me. Since you can identify all 10 materials, you should have some skill. Gongsun Xiaoye's beautiful eyes revealed excitement, as if she had met a rare opponent. Seeing Gongsun Xiaoye pestering him, Yi Guchen pondered for a moment and said, "If you want me to stay, I can. But after I defeat you, I want enough snow clay embryos." Gongsun Xiaoye patted her flat chest and said, "The competition hasn't even started and you're already saying that you can defeat me. I'm really interested in this guy who hides his head but only shows his tail. Although snow clay embryos are precious, my Gongsun family has a lot of them. I promise you." Yi Guchen nodded slightly and returned to the Tower of Jewels with Gongsun Xiaoye. Inside the tower, when everyone saw Gongsun Xiaoye and Yi Guchen return together, their eyes were filled with shock. This person was actually invited back by Miss Gongsun personally. He really has a lot of face. I don't believe that he can really identify all 10 materials. There were still some blacksmiths who had doubts. They couldn't accept that this guy who wore a bamboo hat and didn't even dare to show his face could beat them in blacksmithing. "Miss Gongsun, could this be a mistake? Although this guy's cultivation is not bad, he doesn't have any talent in blacksmithing." At this moment, Madame Xiao stepped forward. She didn't want to see Yi Guchen receiving special treatment from Gongsun Xiaoye. One had to know that Gongsun Xiaoye was Shen Tumiao's official wife. "You mean that I made a mistake in my judgment?" Gongsun Xiaoye looked at Madame Xiao with a hint of playfulness in her tone. "Perhaps there was a mistake," Madame Xiao said thoughtfully. In the next moment, Gongsun Xiaoye's figure suddenly turned into a red shadow and swept in front of Madame Xiao, slapping her. Poor Madame Xiao. She had just been slapped by the Shintu family's guard and had yet to recover. Now, she was slapped again by Gongsun Xiaoye. Her cheeks swelled even higher, and her lips were cracked and bleeding. "Mother!" Xiao Wanru held Madame Xiao and bit her jade lips tightly. Their family had no status in front of Gongsun Xiaoye at all. "How dare an old woman like you question my matters?" Gongsun Xiaoye was originally a little pepper, and her personality was extremely fierce. "Miss Gongsun, we're on the same side as you. My daughter, Wanru, is young Master Shen Tumiao's concubine, and also your future sister." Madame Xiao covered her face and cried out. Concubine?" Yi Guchen heard and was slightly surprised. His gaze under the bamboo hat involuntarily looked at Xiao Wanru. The difference in status between a wife and a concubine was like heaven and earth. As if she felt Yi Guqin's gaze, Xiao Wanru's jade face was bashful, and she lowered her head, feeling a little ashamed. What, concubine? You want me to be that idiot's wife? I'm not even willing. Do you think you'll be proud of being a concubine? What a wretch! Gong Sun Xiaoye's words were merciless. Her words made Xiao Wanru's cheeks burn as if they were on fire. Her face and ears were red, and she was extremely ashamed. Madame Zhao's face also alternated between green and white. Many gazes from the surroundings were strange and mocking. What a disgrace! Xiao Lai sighed deeply. He was almost angered to death by Madame Xiao. Wasn't it good to just watch quietly? Why did she have to interrupt? Now, Madame Xiao was like a pig looking into a mirror. She was in an awkward situation. Young Master Shen Tuyuan, say something. Madame Xiao looked at Shen Tuyuan for help. Shen Tuyuan snorted coldly and completely ignored Madame Xiao. However, he was indeed not convinced by Yi Guqin. Miss Gongsun, I don't believe that this kid can identify all 10 materials correctly. Let's not talk about the others. Just the last material alone, I'm afraid that not a single blacksmith here can identify it. However, how can this kid determine that this or is called meteorite sand? Shen Tuyuan questioned, having looked at the list earlier. Gong Sun Xiaoya also looked at Yi Guqin doubtfully. As far as she knew, this material was placed in the Gong Sun family. Only those old men had found some clues after flipping through the ancient records. Their initial judgment was that it was meteorite sand. Although the person in front of her was wearing a bamboo hat, she could also determine that he was a youth. Was it possible for a youth to have more experience in identifying materials than the blacksmiths in the Gongsun family? Hearing this, Yi Guqin's expression was indifferent as he spoke. Meteorite sand is a fragment of a fallen star that falls into the sea and accumulates at the bottom of the sea for more than 100 years. It is nourished by the fertile soil at the bottom of the sea. The surface is black, and the interior is silvery white. It contains the power of the stars, and is a precious material for blacksmithing. If you still don't believe me, you can let a martial artist who cultivates a star technique hold meteorite sand and cultivate. It will be twice the result with half the effort. Yi Guqin's tone was indifferent and calm. Compared to him, it was Shen Tuyuan who was more like an inexperienced junior, extremely arrogant and impatient. Men test it. Gong Sun Xiaoya waved her hand. She was also very curious. After that, they found a martial artist who cultivated a star technique. After testing it, the martial artist's face was filled with surprise. It is indeed effective. At this point, the truth was revealed. Everyone knew that this precious material was, without a doubt, the falling star sand. This made Shen Tuyuan's expression extremely ugly. It was as if someone had slapped him loudly in the face. As for Gong Sun Xiaoya, her bright eyes stared unblinkingly at Yi Guqin. It was as if she was looking at an undiscovered treasure. Yi Guqin's performance in identifying materials was indeed amazing. What are you so proud of? There is still the next round of material selection. Shen Tuyuan's face was gloomy. He was unwilling to accept this result. As the blacksmithing genius of the Shen Tuyuan family, other than Gong Sun Xiaoya, there were few in the younger generation who could beat him. How could he be willing to let an unknown brat take away the reputation that belonged to him? Chapter 397. After inviting Yi Guqin back, Gong Sun Xiaoya returned to the second floor of the building. Looks like this blacksmith convention is really a pleasant surprise. Gong Sun Xiaoya giggled. She was in a good mood. Are you talking about that young man called Qin? LV Qinghan remained indifferent. She had no interest in blacksmithing, so she did not care if that young man called Chen was a blacksmith genius. That brat really exceeded my expectations. You have to know that the last few materials can only be identified by those old men in the family. Even Shen Tuyuan was wrong about 2 of them. He really makes me look forward to it. Gong Sun Xiaoya's eyes shone brightly as she clenched her small fists. Identifying materials is not the only way to blacksmith. Junior sister, let's continue watching. LV Qinghan shook her head and smiled. She felt that Gong Sun Xiaoye was too rash. This was only the first round. It was too presumptuous to judge that the young man had a rare talent in blacksmithing. In the gem forging building, the second round of material selection had officially begun. Some attendants moved the stone tables away and replaced them with a huge stone table. On the stone table, there were many metal ores. Some were dazzling, some were golden, and some were dark. It was a dazzling array. The old man in charge of the convention took a step forward and said, "The second round of material selection begins now. Every blacksmith can choose 3 ores from the stone table in front of you. You will be ranked according to the rarity of the 3 ores. Only the top 10 blacksmiths are qualified to compete with Miss Gong Sun. At the same time, the 3 ores that you choose will be the main material for your blacksmithing. Therefore, you need to consider not only the rarity of the materials, but also the degree of compatibility between them." After the old man finished speaking, all the blacksmiths frowned and looked serious. The difficulty of the second round was obviously much higher than the first round. Not only did one have to have a pair of eyes to choose the rarer materials, one also had to consider the compatibility between the materials. Some rare materials would not only not increase in strength when stacked together, but their attributes would also clash. The weapon forged would be no different from scrap metal. Therefore, this stage tested a blacksmith's foundation even more. Amongst those materials, I have put in quite a number of treasured materials. I wonder if that kid named Chen will be able to identify them? The person that Gong Sun Xiaoye was most concerned about right now was Yi Guchen. Next was Shen Tuyuan. Soon, all of the participating blacksmiths surrounded the stone platform and began to choose their materials. Shen Tuyuan's gaze swept across the entire stone platform, his face full of confidence. With a single glance, there were no less than 10 types of rare materials that caught his eye. On the other hand, Yi Guchen glanced at the stone platform indifferently. His eyes flickered as if he was thinking about something. Some blacksmiths had already stepped forward to choose their materials. Shen Tuyuan also stepped forward, and the first thing he did was to select a seemingly unremarkable jet black material. Why did young Master Shen choose such an inconspicuous material? The surrounding blacksmiths cast sidelong glances in surprise. On the second floor, Gong Sun Xiaoye's eyes lit up when she saw this. She said, "This kid from the Shen clan is quite capable. This Shen Tuyuan is indeed the most talented blacksmith here apart from you, junior sister." LV Qinghan also secretly nodded when she saw this. "May I ask what this material is, young Master Shintu?" a blacksmith asked. Since Shen Tuyuan had obtained this material, it naturally belonged to him. Therefore, he was not stingy. With a hint of pride, he said, "This material is only recorded in the Shen clan's records. It is normal that you do not know about it. This material is called tungsten steel rock. Although it looks unremarkable, it is a rare treasure material." "So this is tungsten steel rock. I am really blind. Only young Master Shintu can identify it. I am ashamed." Many blacksmiths shook their heads, feeling that they were frogs at the bottom of a well. As a blacksmith genius from a super family, Shen Tuyuan indeed had real ability. Young Master Shintu is really capable. Unlike a certain someone who only passed this round by luck. He is still at a loss even now in the second round. Madame Xiao spared no effort to flatter Shen Tuyuan. At the same time, she glanced at Yi Guchen, who had not made a move since the beginning, and spoke in a strange tone. Because of Yi Guchen, she had been slapped in the face by Gong Sun Xiaoye. Therefore, Madame Xiao naturally did not want to see Yi Guchen reveal his forging talent again. If Yi Guchen was really appreciated by Gong Sun Xiaoye, how awkward would it be for her and Xiao Wanru? Yi Guchen ignored the barking. He was thinking about the combination of materials in his mind. In this round, as long as he could enter the top 10, he could exchange pointers with Gong Sun Xiaoye. Therefore, Yi Guchen did not need to pick the rarest material to get first place. This was because when it came to forging, the combination of materials was still important. The rarity was secondary. After understanding this point, Yiguchen finally made a move. He picked up a fiery red crystal. This was called the fire crystal. It was a type of crystal formed at the bottom of a volcano. Although it was not extremely precious, it was still a rare treasure. Yiguchen's every move now would attract the attention of countless people. Therefore, when they saw Yiguchen choose the fire crystal, some of the blacksmiths were shocked. This young man actually chose the fire crystal. Although the fire crystal is rare, it is definitely not the rarest material here. Did he make a mistake? He performed so amazingly in the first round. I thought he would pick some rare material. I know of such materials too. Immediately, many of the blacksmiths started to discuss. Seeing this, Shen Tuyuan's eyes were filled with disdain. He sneered, "Maybe you saw the fire crystal's beautiful appearance and thought it was precious. Ha, how shallow." Shen Tuyuan's heart was completely at ease. In the beginning, he really couldn't figure out Yiguchen. After all, it wasn't easy for anyone to identify all 10 materials correctly. However, Yiguchen's move made Shen Tuyuan feel completely at ease. He was just a kid who got lucky. Gongsun Xiaoya, who was on the second floor of the loft, saw Yiguchen's choice. Her face fell, and she said with a hint of disappointment, "Why did he choose the fire crystal? Although it is also precious, it is not the most precious material." Gongsun Xiaoya sighed. She thought she had picked up a treasure and that there would be a real opponent who could compete with her. However, the greater the hope, the greater the disappointment. "Junior sister, I have already warned you. Don't judge a person too arbitrarily. Many people are superficial and have no inner qualities." LV Qinghan shook her head slightly. She did not know much about blacksmithing, so she did not think that Yiguchen's previous performance was amazing. "Sigh, let's see what he chooses next." Gongsun Xiaoya frowned. However, Yiguchen's second choice caused an uproar. "This kid is messing around." Even Gongsun Xiaoya's eyebrows were raised, and she was angry again. Chapter 398. It was because Yiguchen's second choice was a piece of azure jade. The jade was called the 100-year cold heart jade. It was also a rare treasure material, but it wasn't the rarest material on this stone platform. But the reason why Gongsun Xiaoya was angry was because the 100-year cold heart jade and the fire crystal. One was of the cold attribute, while the other was of the blazing attribute. These were two materials with completely opposite attributes that clashed with each other. Not to mention the real blacksmiths, even those who knew a little about blacksmithing would know. When materials with clashing attributes were combined together, not only would they not be able to bring out their full effect, but they would also clash with each other. The power would be chaotic, and the final result would be a scrap. Not to mention Gongsun Xiaoya, even an outsider like LV Qinghan could see the clues. She pursed her lips and said with a faint smile, "This person is interesting and unexpected." "What unexpected? He's just messing around. Even if he passes this round, how can he forge a divine weapon with these two materials when it's time to forge?" Gongsun Xiaoya was so angry that she puffed up her cheeks. She crossed her arms in front of her chest, her face full of resentment. She thought she had found a good piece of jade, but in the end, Yiguchen's choice was such an outsider. She was extremely disappointed. As for the other people who were choosing materials around the stone platform, they were all stunned when they saw Yiguchen's choice. Merciless mockery and mockery rang out incessantly. Seeing this, Shen Tuyuan said with a playful smile, "Everyone, don't be sarcastic to this little brother. Although he doesn't know blacksmithing, he still has some eyesight and can pass this round." Now, Shen Tuyuan wanted Yiguchen to pass this round, because he wanted to see how embarrassed Yiguchen would be when it was time to forge. Like I said, that kid just got lucky. How can he compare to young Master Shintu? Madame Xiao did not stop talking. Even Xiao Wanru found out from the conversations of the other blacksmiths that Yiguchen had made a very stupid choice. "Young Master Yi, if you only wanted to attract Miss Gongsuan's attention, then you have indeed succeeded." Xiao Wanru sighed and shook her head. Previously, she was indeed ashamed because of Gongsun Xiaoya. But now, Yiguchen's situation wasn't much better than hers. The vanity of a young girl made Xiao Wanru more willing to see the embarrassed Yiguchen. Because of this, Xiao Wanru would not feel inferior just because she was a concubine. Around the stone platform, Shintu Yuan had already chosen 3 materials. That kind of eyesight made Gong Sun Xiaoye secretly praise. The 3 materials that Shintu Yuan chose are the most precious ones on the stone table. What's even rarer is that the attributes of these materials don't conflict with each other, so they won't bring any difficulty to the forging process. Gong Sun Xiaoye nodded to herself. On the other side, Yiguchen had finally finished selecting the last piece of material. That's cloud essence? The disappointment in Gong Sun Xiaoye's eyes deepened. The rarity of cloud marrow was considered average, and it was a non-elemental material with almost no special characteristics. Yiguchen's choice was really mediocre. Forget it. Why was I so stupid to personally invite him back? Now it's me who's losing face. Gong Sun Xiaoye was fuming. The more she looked at Yiguchen, the more she disliked him. After the selection of materials, it was time for the judging. Young Master Shintu is really amazing. All 3 materials are top-notch. Even the old man who was hosting the competition couldn't help but praise. He checked them one by one. When it was Yiguchen's turn, the old man sighed. The rarity is acceptable, but... The old man didn't finish his sentence, but everyone knew what he meant. The final result was out. Coincidentally, Yiguchen was ranked 10th and could enter the final stage of forging. Congratulations. You're indeed someone that Miss Gong Sun personally invited. You're really capable. I'm looking forward to your performance in forging. Shintu Yuan laughed. He was in an extremely good mood. He wasn't congratulating Yiguchen, but mocking Gong Sun Xiaoye at the same time. Shintu Yuan, if you say another word, I'll kick you out. Gong Sun Xiaoye stood up. Her flat chest heaved up and down. She was extremely depressed. Let's not talk about it anymore. I'll wait for his performance. Shintu Yuan laughed. Gong Sun Xiaoye looked at Yiguchen with some resentment. Obviously, Yiguchen, who she personally invited back, made her lose face. Yiguchen, who was under the bamboo hat and black veil, was indifferent from beginning to end. He didn't care about the eyes of the outside world. He was thinking in his heart. According to the Heavenly Works mineral collection, although the fire crystal and the 100-year chilling heart jade have conflicting attributes, if they're combined with the cloud essence, they'll form a more advanced material, the Ice-Fire Mystic Heart Essence. The value of a piece of Ice-Fire Mystic Heart Essence is probably equal to half of the treasures on the stone platform. However, to combine it into the Ice-Fire Mystic Heart Essence, not only does the temperature have to be controlled, but also the number of times it needs to be forged. In addition, it needs to be melted with a strange flame of the same origin as ice and fire to prevent it from conflicting. It's because of such harsh conditions that the method of fusion is almost lost. Only the Heavenly Works mineral collection that the old drunkard gave me has a brief record. Yiguchen sorted out his thoughts in his heart. He saw Yiguchen standing there motionlessly, as if he was stunned. Gong Sun Xiaoye gritted her teeth, unable to vent her anger. Let's start forging. Gong Sun Xiaoye snorted and said angrily. She was obviously not in a good mood. Oh, this kid is going to be unlucky. He actually made the little pepper of the Gong Sun family unhappy. Some of the blacksmiths around cast pitiful gazes at Yiguchen. After the material selection round, only 10 people, including Shintu Yuan and Yiguchen, passed the round. Shintu Yuan was first, and Yiguchen was last. As for the forging round, it was not in the gem forging building, but in the forging room behind it. Gong Sun Xiaoye and the top 10 blacksmiths went to the forging room together. Let's go and see how that kid embarrasses himself. Madame Xiao rubbed her swollen cheeks with a trace of resentment in her eyes. She could not wait to see Yiguchen make a fool of himself. Behind the gem forging building, 11 forging rooms had already been arranged. These 11 forging rooms were built according to the requirements of the blacksmith conference. The 4 sides, including the roof, were all transparent. Everyone in the surroundings could clearly see the situation in each forging room. Therefore, There was no possibility of cheating. It was fair and transparent. What kind of weapon could be forged depended entirely on the individual's ability. Let the competition begin. I'll make it clear that as long as anyone can forge a better weapon than me, he'll be able to choose any of the treasures of our Gongsun family. Even if it's a man, as long as he's not too ugly, I might even be willing to marry him. Gongsun Xiaoya's words were shocking once again. Miss Gongsun, please don't joke like that. You're already my cousin's fiancé, Shintu Yuan said solemnly. Do you think the weapon you forge can beat me? Gongsun Xiaoya said with her hands on her hips. That's not it. I don't even have the slightest confidence against Miss Gongsun, let alone others, Shintu Yuan said honestly. The blacksmiths here were all from the younger generation. Almost no one could beat Gongsun Xiaoya. Then what are you worried about? Gongsun Xiaoya snorted. Shintu Yuan's expression was a little embarrassed. He had indeed thought too much about it. Chapter 399. The 11 blacksmiths, including Gongsun Xiaoya, were ready. However, at this moment Yi Guchen suddenly spoke. May I ask if you have any forging tools, such as a hammer? As soon as Yi Guchen's words came out, the surrounding people were once again stunned. As a blacksmith, he did not even have any forging tools? This time, Gongsun Xiaoya was really angry. Are you a blacksmith or not? I personally invited you here because I thought you had some ability. In the end, not only do you not understand the conflict between the attributes of the materials, you don't even have any forging tools. Gongsun Xiaoya was so angry that she almost went crazy. She wanted to smash Yi Guchen's head with her hammer. It was like a swordsman who was used to using a sword that he was familiar with. Any blacksmith would have a forging tool that was suitable for them. Using a forging tool that was most suitable for them would increase the success rate of their forging. This was also the standard to judge whether a blacksmith was qualified or not. However, Yi Guchen did not even have his own forging tool. It was indeed unreasonable. Letting such an unprofessional person in is an insult to us blacksmiths. That's right. He doesn't even have his own forging tool, yet he still wants to compete. Who is he looking down on? I suggest that this person be excluded. That's right. If he still wants to compete, we won't compete. A stone stirred up 1,000 ripples. Yi Guchen's words completely enraged the blacksmiths. Other than Gongsun Xiaoya and Shintu Yuan, there was also Yi Guchen himself. The other 8 blacksmiths actually said in unison that Yi Guchen should be expelled. This kid puffed himself up at his own cost. Great, now he can't get out of this embarrassing situation. Madame Xiao, who was watching from the side, covered her mouth and laughed proudly. It was as if Yi Guchen's expulsion was great news to her. Xiao Wanru also heaved a sigh of relief. Yi Guchen was really a blacksmithing genius. If Gongsun Xiaoya picked him, she would feel even more inferior. Sai, don't be like this. We are all in the same line of work. How can you be so heartless? At that moment, Shintu Yuan spoke. He was actually persuading the 8 blacksmiths. Yi Guchen, who was under the bamboo hat, was slightly surprised that Shintu Yuan would speak up for him. However, in the next moment, a playful smile appeared on Shintu Yuan's face. He looked at Yi Guchen and said with a faint smile, Actually, I am also very curious. What kind of weapon can you forge with the fire crystal and the 100-year chilling heart jade? You have really broadened my horizons. His tone was filled with mockery. Yi Guchen understood. How could Shintu Yuan be so kind? He just wanted to continue watching him make a fool of himself. Shintu Yuan's words carried a lot of weight. Although the other 8 blacksmiths were still angry, they did not say anything else. Gongsun Xiaoya saw all of this in her eyes. Although her personality was shrewish and arrogant, she was not stupid. She knew what Shintu Yuan's motive was. She glanced at Yi Guchen and said, Since you don't have anything in your stomach, why participate in the blacksmith's convention and embarrass yourself? I will give you 2 choices. One is to compensate you 50,000 crystal jades and give up your qualification. You can pretend that I did not personally ask you to stay. The other is to continue the competition. However, you will bear the consequences. Although Gongsun Xiaoye was arrogant, she was not evil. At that moment, she gave Yi Guchen the right to choose. Shen Tuyuan's eyes flickered. He was really afraid that Yi Guchen would give up. Then he would not be able to watch a good show. I see that you are very confident in yourself. Do not give up. Continue the competition. Perhaps there will be a miracle? Shen Tuyuan advised, kindly. Under the black veil, Yi Guchen's gaze was a little strange. If he really stayed and fused the ice and fire mysterious heart essence, then Shen Tuyuan would have no chance at all. There was actually such a kind person in the world. He would rather let himself lose so that his opponent could stay and win. Shen Tuyuan, are you sure you want me to stay? Yi Guchen asked. Of course. Perhaps you can create a miracle and shock everyone, making us worship you. Seeing that Yi Guchen was persuaded by him, Shen Tuyuan smiled. Alright, I will stay. Yi Guchen nodded slightly. Shen Tuyuan not only helped him suppress the hostility of the other blacksmiths, but also tried his best to persuade him to stay. Facing such a kind person, how could Yi Guchen bear to refuse? You are really a blockhead. Gongsun Xiaoye was completely disappointed in Yi Guchen. She no longer had any interest in him. A headstrong and self-opinionated person would not be welcomed anywhere. Next, a waiter brought in the forging tools. Of course, they were the most ordinary tools. It was impossible to give Yi Guchen any rare tools. Then, the 11 of them entered their own forging rooms. There was a forging furnace in the blacksmith room. Gongsun Xiaoye slowly raised her hand. Then, with a pop, a ball of jade-like flame appeared, bringing with it an extreme heat. That should be Miss Gongsuan's rare fire, the Emerald Crystal Heart Fire. I heard that the Gongsun family obtained this rare fire from the battle with the Fire Tribe. The spectating blacksmiths said in an extremely envious tone. A rare fire was something that all blacksmiths dreamed of. Unfortunately, only 1 in 10,000 blacksmiths had a rare fire. On the other side, Shen Tuyuan looked at Gongsun Xiaoye with a faint jealousy in his eyes. Although he was a blacksmithing genius of the Shentu family, he did not have a rare fire. Shen Tuyuan raised his hand, and a ball of bright yellow flame floated out. This was not a rare fire, but the fire of a type of monster beast. The fire of a monster beast was also rare. However, it could not be compared to the rare fire of the world. The other blacksmiths were even worse. They could only use their qi to ignite the forging furnace to smelt and forge. Yi Guchen's eyes flashed. He did not immediately summon the heavenly sun Xianming fire. This was because many people knew that Yi Guchen had a rare fire of the world, and the heavenly sun Xianming fire's characteristics were too obvious. It could be recognized at a glance. After thinking for a while, Yi Guchen summoned another type of fire that he had. The vermilion bird divine fire. A scarlet flame emerged from Yi Guchen's palm. As it tumbled, it vaguely formed the shape of a vermilion bird. However, it was somewhat illusory and blurry, so it was difficult for others to distinguish it clearly. That young man called Qin also has a type of monster beast fire? Yi Guchen was now the focus of everyone's attention. Many people were waiting to see him make a fool of himself. However, when Yi Guchen summoned the vermilion bird divine fire, it caused many people to be surprised. Yes, a lucky kid. Shen Tuyuan's eyes darkened when he saw this. Obviously, Yi Guchen's possession of a monster beast fire had exceeded his expectations. However, Shen Tuyuan did not know that Yi Guchen's vermilion bird divine fire was not on the same level as his monster beast fire. There was no comparison between the two. After all, the vermilion bird was an immemorial sacred beast. The power of its divine fire was comparable to the rare fire of the world. It was just that no one here knew what was good for them and could not recognize it at all. Even Gongsun Xiaoye did not care. She thought that her rare fire of the world was far superior to everyone else's. Regardless of whether it was Yi Guchen's fire or Shen Tuyuan's monster beast fire, they were not worth mentioning in her eyes. This was also one of the reasons why Gongsun Xiaoye was so arrogant. Chapter 400. After the 11 blacksmiths summoned their flames, they began to forge for real. In fact, Everyone could roughly judge a blacksmith's standard from the flames summoned. Gong Sun Xiaoye possessed the emerald crystal core fire, so she was naturally the most qualified. Next was Shinta Yuan's demonic beast fire. Of course, although Yi Guchen's vermilion bird divine fire was of high quality, no one recognized it. Therefore, in their eyes, Yi Guchen's flame was at most on par with Shinta Yuan's. However, due to Yi Guchen's amateurish behavior, the surrounding people were not optimistic about him. Some blacksmiths even looked at Yi Guchen with disdain. The first step of forging is smelting, softening the materials moderately, an experienced old blacksmith said. The surrounding people stared intently at the 11 transparent forging rooms, afraid that they would miss out on even the slightest detail. Gong Sun Xiaoye placed the materials into the furnace, then heated them up with the emerald crystal core fire. Her skillful technique made everyone secretly admire her. In addition, Shinta Yuan's performance was also very eye-catching. His control of the fire was very precise. Then, numerous gazes with a hint of playfulness and mockery looked towards the forging room where Yi Guchen was. Yi Guchen's technique was steady and calm. Although it was not as stunning as Gong Sun Xiaoye's and Shinta Yuan's, it was not to the point of being flustered. It seems that this person knows a little about forging, the old blacksmith commented. However, they did not know. Gong Sun Xiaoye and Shinta Yuan had been immersed in forging for a long time. They could be said to be geniuses who specialized in forging. As for Yi Guchen, he had always specialized in his own sword, martial arts, and cultivation realm. As for forging, other than learning from the old drunkard for a period of time, he had almost never practiced it. There was a fundamental difference between the two. Therefore, everyone here, including Gong Sun Xiaoye and Shinta Yuan, did not know. Yi Guchen, who was competing with them, was only a blacksmith who had not learned his craft. Not long after, Gong Sun Xiaoye was the first to complete the smelting process. She lifted her chin slightly, revealing a trace of pride. Indeed, Gong Sun Xiaoye thought that this blacksmith's conference was her stage alone. Even Shinta Yuan was only a supporting character. Even Yi Guchen, who had brought a trace of interest to Gong Sun Xiaoye, did not pay much attention to him now. This was because Yi Guchen had chosen two materials, the fire crystal and 100-year chilled heart jade. Gong Sun Xiaoye took Shinta Yuan, Shinta Yuan, Shinta Yuan's Shinta Yuan, Shinta Yuan, Shintu is as Shinta Yuan Shintu. Shinta Yu Shinta Shu was Shinta Shintu to a black ashent. Was Shinta Yuan, Shintu Yuan Shint. After another quarter of an hour, Yi Guchen and the other blacksmiths began to forge with their hammers. Although the forging hammers of those blacksmiths were not as good as those of Gong Sun Xiaoye and the others, they were still top-notch spiritual weapons. On the other hand, Yi Guchen's forging hammer was an ordinary low-grade spiritual inscription divine weapon. The outcome has already been decided. There are no other results. Forging hammers are extremely important to forging. A good forging hammer can produce effects comparable to a 10,000 refinements. That kid's chances are slim. The old blacksmith looked at Yi Guchen and shook his head slightly. Madame Xiao and the others heaved a sigh of relief. Forging is related to the quality of the final materials. No one here can forge more than me. Gong Sun Xiaoye was very confident in herself. She was the #1 blacksmith of the younger generation in the Gong Sun family, having created the record of 80,000 refinements. On the other side, the corner of Shinta Yuan's mouth also carried a faint smile. He looked at Gong Sun Xiaoye with fighting spirit hidden in his eyes. Everyone thought that my forging skills would be slightly inferior to Gong Sun Xiaoye's, but now, it's time for me to show my true strength, Shinta Yuan thought to himself. After a brief moment, the 11 blacksmiths began to repeatedly temper the materials. Even those who were not blacksmiths knew. The more times they were forged, the better the quality of the materials. The difference between the quality of the 1,000 refinements and the 10,000 refinements was like heaven and earth. Clang, clang, clang. Gong Sun Xiaoye was petite, but she was vigorous when forging. She held the fire cloud hammer in her small hand and hammered the materials at an extremely fast speed. Shinta Yuan was also hammering. Although his speed was slightly slower than Gong Sun Xiaoye's, his strength was slightly higher. Yi Guqin, on the other hand, was completely focused on hammering. He seemed to have returned to the state when he was forging the meteorite soft sword under the guidance of the old drunkard. He was focused, serious, and meticulous. Outside the arena, the blacksmiths who had originally scoffed at Yi Guqin were looking at Yi Guqin with surprise. That kind of focused and serious expression was moving. Looks like that kid isn't really an amateur. The old blacksmith nodded secretly. For a moment, a small number of blacksmiths changed their view of Yi Guqin. But that was it. After all, Yi Guqin's choice of materials meant that his final product would most likely be a waste. Forging was not something that could be completed in a short period of time. All the spectators in the arena fell silent. Only the clanging sounds of forging could be heard continuously. However, no one there, including Gong Sun Xiaoye and the rest, noticed it. On the top floor of the gem forging building, a middle-aged man in cloth robes stood with his hands behind his back, quietly watching the battle below. If Gong Sun Xiaoye saw this, she would definitely scream. This middle-aged man in cloth robes was the head of the Gong Sun family, and also her father, Gong Sun Xianlong. Gong Sun Xianlong looked down and nodded with satisfaction in his eyes. This girl's forging skills have not fallen behind. She might be able to challenge the 100,000 refinements this time. The only one here who is qualified to compete with her is that kid from the Shintu family. Gong Sun Xianlong secretly judged. It was not that he did not see Yi Guqin. However, Yi Guqin's previous performance was somewhat unbearable for a blacksmith. He would definitely not catch the eye of a 4-star blacksmith like Gong Sun Xianlong. This young man named Chen's forging skills are quite normal. I wonder if he has the ability to 10,000 refinements. Gong Sun Xianlong casually glanced at him and did not pay too much attention. If he could not even 10,000 refinements, there was no need to pay attention to him. The 11 blacksmiths below naturally did not know that their every move was being watched by Gong Sun Xianlong, a 4-star blacksmith. Chapter 401. As time passed, some of the 11 blacksmiths could no longer hold on. Forging wasn't as simple as forging materials. This process was extremely taxing on one's physical strength, true energy, and even one's soul. It could be said that every strike of the hammer was a painstaking effort. This was also the reason why those true master blacksmiths were so revered and respected. There were even some master blacksmiths who would casually wave their hands after forging rare divine weapons, and countless experts would be willing to serve them at their beck and call. Finally, one of the participating blacksmiths was drenched in sweat. His lips were pale, and his true energy was exhausted. He felt dizzy and collapsed to the ground. 8,120 refinements. There was a person recording the number of refinements. 8,000 refinements. Although it's not high, it's still acceptable, said the old blacksmith. However, Gong Sun Xianlong, who was on the top floor of the jewel forging building, didn't even look at him. Anything below 10,000 refinements was trash. If a blacksmith couldn't even reach 10,000 refinements, it meant that his future was limited. The blacksmith's face was ashen as he slowly shook his head. There was no need to continue the process. He had already lost. As time passed, another blacksmith couldn't hold on anymore. 9,250 refinements, said the person recording calmly. Then a third blacksmith. 10,300 refinements. Already 10,000 refinements. That's not bad, said the old blacksmith in admiration. The blacksmith who'd surpassed 10,000 refinements began the next step. After that, more and more blacksmiths stopped forging. Among them, the highest was only 21,000 refinements. That was enough to earn everyone's praise. Even Gong Sun Xianlong, who was watching from the shadows, nodded slightly. Such a person can be considered for the Gong Sun family, thought Gong Sun Xianlong. At present, only 3 of the 11 participants were still forging. To everyone's surprise, Yi Guqin was one of the 3 people. Could it be that we've misjudged him? The spectating blacksmiths were extremely surprised. They looked suspiciously at Yi Guqin in the forging room. At this time, even Gongsun Xiaoye and Shen Tiyuan slowed down their forging speed due to fatigue. But Yi Guqin, from the moment he held the casting hammer until now, had maintained an almost perfect speed without the slightest bit of delay. Even those who were prejudiced against Yi Guqin knew that the young man in the bamboo hat was no ordinary person. This kid is out of my expectations. Gongsun Xianlong was slightly surprised on the top floor of the jewel forging building. At first, he had doubted whether Yi Guqin could 10,000 refine. Now, Yi Guqin had smithied more than 30,000 times, and he did not look tired at all. Gongsun Xianlong already had the intention of roping Yi Guqin into his Gongsun family. On the other side, Gongsun Xiaoye and Shen Tiyuan were also paying attention to their opponents. When they saw that Yi Guqin was still persevering, they were stunned. However, they didn't care too much about it because Yi Guqin's choice of materials meant that he wouldn't have a finished product in the end. Clang, clang, clang. Time passed by amidst the crisp sounds of hammering. The further they went, the more astonished the crowd became. It's already 70,000 refinements. A young blacksmith said with a trembling voice. 70,000 refinements was already an extremely shocking number. However, Yi Guqin and the other two showed no signs of stopping. In the end, when the person recording the number of times reported Yi Guqin's 100,000 refinements, the scene was already in an uproar. This was definitely a record for the younger generation of blacksmiths. I can't take it anymore. Gongsun Xiaoye's face was pale at this moment, clearly exhausted. Her previous record was 80,000 refinements, which had already crushed the group of blacksmithing geniuses in the Gongsun family. This 100,000 refinements had already exceeded her own limit. Even Gongsun Xiaoye was very satisfied with herself. However, what made her angry was that Shen Tiyuan was still persevering. It was still Yi Guqin, who had infuriated her previously, who also didn't stop. I'm actually only third this time? This result was completely out of Gongsun Xiaoye's expectations. However, Shen Tiyuan didn't surpass Gongsun Xiaoye by much. His final number of hammerings stopped at 110,300 times. After that, in the entire venue, only Yi Guqin's forging room continued to resonate with the sound of hammering. The sound of metal colliding was like a heavy hammer that ruthlessly smashed into everyone's hearts. This kid is still persevering? Shen Tiyuan's face was filled with shock. He was unwilling to believe the truth in front of him. Gongsun Xiaoye's red lips were also wide open. She had previously thought that Yi Guqin was staying because he was obstinate and opinionated. However, from the looks of it now, the person who was truly superficial was actually her. As for Madame Xiao, who had been mocking and hooting at the beginning at this moment, her eyes were also filled with shock. She didn't dare to speak carelessly anymore. Could it be that young Master Yi is really a blacksmith? Xiao Wanru's jade-like hand slightly covered her mouth, somewhat in disbelief. The surrounding people's gazes towards Yi Guqin had completely changed. At this moment, no one dared to mock Yi Guqin's amateurish actions anymore. This was because Yi Guqin's current performance had completely shocked them. Just as everyone was feeling shocked, there was a strange movement from Yi Guqin's forging room. With a crisp cracking sound, his hammer, a low-grade spiritual inscription's divine weapon, was directly shattered. This scene was beyond everyone's expectations. The forging hammer shattered? The old blacksmith's eyes widened, and he immediately jumped up and down anxiously. They still wanted to know what the limit of the young man called Chen's forging was. How could they be willing to stop just like that? In the forging room, Yi Guqin was stunned as he looked at the smithing hammer that had been shattered into pieces. He suddenly recalled that the hammer that he had used to forge 100,000 refinements was the old drunkard's heavenly spirit vibrating hammer. Its quality was probably far superior to Gongsun Xiaoye's fire cloud hammer. This low-grade forging hammer naturally couldn't satisfy Yi Guqin's needs. However, Yi Guqin didn't feel that it was a pity. Although he hadn't reached his limit, if he could fuse the ice-fire mysterious heart essence, he could still win first place. Just as Yi Guqin was about to stop the forging, a figure suddenly appeared in front of Yi Guqin's forging room. Use my forging hammer. This middle-aged man in cloth robes looked at Yiguchen with a fiery gaze and handed over a dark forging hammer. "Who are you? This is the blacksmith convention. How can an outsider disturb the competition?" Seeing that someone was going to hand Yiguchen a forging hammer, Shinta Yuan immediately stopped what he was doing, stood up, and berated loudly. Yiguchen's performance had already exceeded his expectations. If he continued forging, Shinta Yuan wasn't sure how high the quality of the materials would be in the end. While Shinta Yuan was berating, Gongsun Xiaoye's delicate body trembled. She shouted in surprise, "Stinky Dad, why are you here?" As soon as she said that, the crowd went into an uproar. Shinta Miao's face stiffened, and he was momentarily speechless. Chapter 402. The head of the Gongsun family, Gongsun Xianlong, was obsessed with blacksmithing. At the same time, he was a 4-star blacksmith with an extraordinary status. With Shinta Yuan's status and identity, he was not qualified to meet Gongsun Xianlong. Therefore, he did not know that the middle-aged man in plain clothes in front of him was Gongsun Xiaoye's father, the head of the Gongsun family. "I'm here to watch my daughter's competition, and you call me an outsider?" Gongsun Xuanlong's eyes darkened. Moreover, he could see that Shinta Yuan did not want Yiguchen to continue forging. However, how could Gongsun Xianlong give up the opportunity to test a talent? As a blacksmith, how can you be so jealous? Gongsun Xianlong said coldly as he waved his hand. A strong wave of true qi spread out and hit Shinta Yuan's body. He fell like a kite and landed heavily on the ground, his face covered in dust. If Gongsun Xianlong had not been worried that Shinta Yuan was still participating in the competition, his hand would have broken his bones. "I'm sorry, I was blind." Shinta Yuan stood up awkwardly, gritted his teeth, and bowed. Then he returned to his forging room. He did not dare to be impudent in front of Gongsun Xianlong. Damn it, this kid was chosen by the head of the Gongsun family. However, it doesn't matter. The two materials he chose conflicted with each other and could not form a finished product. When the time comes, the head of the Gongsun family will know how blind he was. Shinta Yuan suppressed his anger. When he revealed his hidden strength, it was even stronger than Gongsun Xiaoye's. Originally, he could have shocked everyone in this blacksmith convention. However, everyone's eyes were now on Yiguchen. Even Gongsun Xianlong personally appeared and lent his forging hammer to Yiguchen. How could Shinta Yuan not be angry? On the other side, Gongsun Xianlong looked at Yiguchen, who was covered by a bamboo hat, and said, "Junior, you're called Shen, right? I'll lend you my forging hammer. Show me all your strength." "Thank you, family head Gongsun." Yiguchen cupped his fists. Through Gongsun Xiaoye, he learned that the plainly dressed man before him was the head of the Gongsun family. Yiguchen took the hammer from Gongsun Xianlong and weighed it in his hand. It was very heavy and of high quality. Although it was still inferior to the old drunkard's heavenly spirit resonating hammer, it was still a rare forging tool. Gongsun Xianlong nodded and quietly retreated to the side. Gongsun Xiaoye stopped what she was doing and crossed her arms in front of her chest, staring at Yiguchen. Phew! Yiguchen exhaled slightly and secretly used the flawless Vajra body. Vigorous qi and blood flowed vigorously in his body. Clang, clang, clang. The sounds of the hammers were crisp and clear. Every hammer strike was extremely steady, but there was also a rhythm to it. At first glance, this kid's forging method seems ordinary and unremarkable. Now that I look at it, it's rather ingenious. Even a 4-star forging master like Gongsun Xianlong was amazed. How would he know that Yiguchen was taught by the old drunkard? The old drunkard was not from the Saint Origin dynasty, but was a forging master from the Nantian region. There was no comparison between the two of them. At this moment, Yiguchen was the only one in the entire place who was still forging. The number of times he was hammering increased exponentially. 130,000 refinements, 150,000 refinements, 180,000 refinements, 200,000 refinements. Just as Yiguchen hammered down with 200,000 refinements, the sound of metal colliding was like thunder, echoing throughout the entire jeweled forging building. Boom! A dazzling brilliance was emitted from the material. That pure wave of energy shocked everyone. Treasure light. It's a top-grade material, Gongsun Xianlong said with a hint of surprise. Treasure light was something that could only happen once in a blue moon, even with his status as a 4-star forging master. It required luck. But now, Yi Guchen had hammered the material to this level with 200,000 refinements. It was extremely shocking. Even Gongsun Xianlong lost his composure, let alone Gongsun Xiaoye, Shintu Yuan, and the other forging masters. Even LV Qinghan, who was watching from the side, was surprised for the first time. Even an outsider like her could sense that Yi Guchen's material was extraordinary. As for Madame Xiao, she was blinded by the brilliance. Her swollen face was drained of blood. Looking at the expressions of the people around him, from the initial disdain to the current shock, Yi Guchen's heart was as calm as an ancient well. This should be enough, Yi Guchen thought to himself. Actually, 200,000 refinements was far from Yi Guchen's limit. When he was in the Qi refinement realm, he was able to reach Gongsun Xiaoye's record of 100,000 refinements. Now that his cultivation was much higher than before, how could his limit be just 200,000 refinements? It was just that Yi Guchen did not want to attract too much attention. It would be troublesome if that happened. So, 200,000 refinements was enough. Of course, if Gongsun Xianlong knew Yi Guchen's true thoughts, he would not just be surprised. You're very good. The Gongsun family strongly invites you to join us, Gongsun Xianlong invited with a smile. Stupid dad, the competition isn't over yet? Gongsun Xiaoye shouted. Actually, she wanted to remind Gongsun Xianlong that Yi Guchen's material was difficult to forge into a divine weapon. Gongsun Xuanlong's mind turned slightly, and the smile on his face faded slightly. Oh, little brother, why don't we end the competition here? As for the knowledge about material attributes, after you join the Gongsun family, I can make the decision to open the library to you. Obviously, Gongsun Xianlong thought that he was giving Yi Guchen a way out. He recognized Yi Guchen's forging talent very much. But in terms of material attributes, it was really unsightly. It could even be said that he had not even reached the entry level. Yi Guchen naturally understood the meaning behind Gongsun Xuanlong's words. Gongsun Xianlong was offended by his choice of fire crystal and 100-year cold heart jade. Thank you for your kindness, Master Gongsun. I will definitely complete this competition, Yi Guchen said calmly. He was not participating in the competition to join the Gongsun family, but for the snow clay embryo. You don't know what's good for you. Not far away, Shintu Yuan sneered. Even Gongsun Xiaoye was secretly annoyed and stomped her feet. She reminded Gongsun Xianlong because she wanted to save some face for Yi Guchen at the end. Yi Guchen was so outstanding in forging. If the final product was not good, how embarrassing would that be? Seeing this, Gongsun Xianlong shook his head slightly and laughed. It's good to be young. When he fails this time, he should be less arrogant and join the Gongsun family with peace of mind. Chapter 403. Gongsun Xianlong did not mind Yi Guchen's rejection. In fact, he admired Yi Guchen's stubbornness. In his opinion, Yi Guchen knew that he would fail at the end, but he still wanted to continue. This spirit was worthy of recognition. Yi Guchen glanced at Gongsun Xuanlong's eyes and knew what he was thinking. Indeed, one can only see further when one stands at a high place. Yi Guchen shook his head. If he had not met the old drunkard, perhaps he would not have seen as much as Gongsun Xianlong. However, this also encouraged Yi Guchen to leave the Saint Origin dynasty and head to a wider world. Yi Guchen dismissed the thoughts in his mind and focused on the next step of forging. The next step after forging was to combine the materials. By stacking materials of different attributes on top of each other and fusing them together. If the elements of the metal were compatible, its advantages would be fully displayed in this step. If the elements clashed, the result would be obvious. All the materials would be wasted. This was also the reason why all the blacksmiths were not optimistic about Yi Guchen's chances. The materials he chose almost completely clashed with each other. It was as if an outsider had randomly chosen them. Gong Sun Xiaoye, Shen Tuyuan, and the others no longer paid attention to Yi Guchen and focused on their forging. In their opinion, Yi Guchen's outcome was already decided. There was no need to pay too much attention to it. Gong Sun Xianlong also looked at Yi Guchen indifferently. He did not want to see Yi Guchen's final product. He was just wondering where Yi Guchen would fail. This step is the most crucial. Yi Guchen took a deep breath. He dismissed all distracting thoughts and focused on forging. What he wanted to forge was a sword, because Yi Guchen only knew how to forge swords now. Among the forging techniques that the old drunkard passed down to me, the best one is naturally the forbidden forging technique. Human soul forging sword, dual cultivation of sword and life. However, I can't use it now. Yi Guchen thought. Refining swords with human souls, dual cultivation of sword and life. This forbidden forging technique was comparable to a god-tier forging technique. As for the god-tier forging technique, it was possible to forge a famed ancient sword. Furthermore, the old drunkard had repeatedly warned him that this forbidden technique could only be used once in a person's lifetime. The sword he forged would follow Yi Guchen for the rest of his life. Yi Guchen was also preparing to use this forbidden forging technique in the future to forge an accompanying divine weapon that was comparable to a famed primordial sword. Therefore, it was impossible for him to use it here. If that's the case, I'll have to use other casting techniques, Yi Guchen thought to himself. The old drunkard had taken Yi Guchen as his disciple and had even passed down his forbidden forging technique to Yi Guchen. Naturally, he wouldn't be stingy with other casting techniques. In his spare time, Yi Guchen had also reviewed those forging techniques, but he had never actually used them. Just as Yi Guchen was deep in thought, he heard a burst of noise from the periphery. Almost everyone's gaze fell on Gong Sun Xiaoye. This was because she had already used the Gong Sun family's most famous casting technique. Green Lotus Fire Accumulation Casting Technique. Gong Sun Xiaoye controlled the emerald crystal heart fire, and as the flames gathered, it vaguely formed the shape of a green lotus. As for the materials that had already been forged, they were wrapped in the fire lotus. Seeing this scene, even Gong Sun Xianlong had a look of satisfaction in his eyes as he nodded slightly. This girl has indeed put in a lot of hard work in her forging. Her green lotus fire accumulation casting technique is already at 70% proficiency. Gong Sun Xianlong sighed in his heart. His daughter was indeed a genius in the field of forging. At this moment, Shen Tuyuan, who was on the other side, also used one of the Shentu family's casting techniques. However, the Shentu family wasn't a family that specialized in forging, so his casting techniques were naturally inferior to the green lotus fire accumulation casting technique. Even so, Shen Tuyuan's casting techniques were superior to some of the other participating blacksmiths. As for Yi Guchen, before using his casting techniques, he had to first fuse the materials. In order to successfully fuse the ice and fire mystic heart essence. Other than the number of times he had to forge it, there was also the temperature, etc. Most importantly, he had to fuse it with a flame of the same origin as ice and fire. Coincidentally, Yi Guchen's heavenly sun mystic underworld fire met this requirement. He thought for a moment, and as he used the heavenly sun mystic underworld fire, he wrapped it with the vermilion bird divine fire. This way, no one would know Yi Guchen's true background. After that, Yi Guchen carefully stacked the infernal crystal, 100-year cold heart jade, and cloud essence together. As he forged and fused them, he secretly used the heavenly sun mystic underworld fire to heat them up. As time passed, the three materials gradually fused together. Faintly, there seemed to be some kind of fluctuation that was about to be emitted. At the same time, Gong Sun Xiaoye, Shen Tuyuan, and the rest relied on their own casting techniques. The divine weapons that they had forged were almost ready. Gong Sun Xiaoye's divine weapon was a sword, and she had fused the spiritual seal that she had prepared beforehand into it. After going through the complicated forging of the green lotus fire accumulation casting technique, it was finally ready. The moment the sword appeared, It emitted an incomparably resplendent brilliance. It's a success. Gong Sun Xiaoye jumped 3 feet high in excitement. Her delicate little face was full of sweat, but there was a trace of pride and joy. Well done. Although it's only a low-grade divine weapon with spiritual inscriptions, it's really rare for someone your age. Gong Sun Xianlong took the sword. The body of the sword shone with a cold light, and the blade was as shiny as snow. Being able to forge a low-grade divine weapon with spiritual inscriptions meant that Gong Sun Xiaoye was a top 2-star blacksmith. She could even be considered a 3-star blacksmith. With her talent, it was possible that she could become a 4-star blacksmith in the future. The surrounding crowd also burst out in praise. She's indeed the young lady of the Gong Sun family. Wanru, you must build a good relationship with her after the competition. Do you understand? We can't afford to offend such a talented blacksmith. Seeing this, Madame Xiao sternly warned Xiao Wanru. Xiao Wanru's lips curled into a bitter smile. Gong Sun Xiaoye had completely crushed her in every aspect. Such shocking talent in blacksmithing also meant that Gong Sun Xiaoye's status would be extraordinary in the future. Thinking of this, Xiao Wanru sighed in her heart. At the same time, her gaze involuntarily turned to Yi Guchen, who was still forging. I wonder how talented young Master Yi is in blacksmithing? Xiao Wanru thought to herself. In her heart, she imagined that if Yi Guchen really had talent comparable to Gong Sun Xiaoye's in blacksmithing, then even if his status was not as high as Shen Miao's, it would not be too far off. At this moment, the divine weapon that Shen Yuan had forged was also out. He had forged an axe, and its quality had also reached the level of a low-grade divine weapon with spiritual inscriptions. However, it was slightly inferior to Gong Sun Xiaoye's sword. It's a pity that my blacksmithing skills are not as good as the green lotus fire forging technique of the Gong Sun family. Otherwise, my divine weapon would definitely not be inferior to hers. Shen Yuan was unconvinced. However, precious blacksmithing skills were like martial arts skills. They were very rare and could not be obtained easily. That fellow is still forging. Could it be that he doesn't have any blacksmithing skills? Shen Yuan's gaze involuntarily turned to Yi Guchen. Not only him, but Gong Sun Xiaoye, Gong Sun Xianlong, LV Qinghan, and the people from the Xiao family all had their gazes fixed on Yi Guchen. This was because until now, among all the blacksmiths, only Yi Guchen had not used any blacksmithing skills. This made people wonder if Yi Guchen really had blacksmithing skills. I'm almost done forging. Next, I'll use that blacksmithing skill, Yi Guchen said to himself as he let out a light sigh. Chapter 404. There was no doubt about the importance of casting techniques to a blacksmith. It could be said that a top-notch casting technique could establish the foundation of a blacksmith family. Some rare casting techniques were almost never taught to outsiders. This was also why Shen Yuan was jealous of Gong Sun Xiaoye's green lotus fire forging technique. However, it was also because of the rarity of casting techniques that most blacksmiths did not have any casting techniques and could only forge weapons using ordinary methods. Yi Guchen, on the other hand, had been fusing and forging until now. He had not used his casting skills yet. Therefore, the surrounding people misunderstood and thought that Yi Guchen might not have any casting techniques. Gong Sun Xianlong was not surprised by this. Casting techniques were rarer than martial arts, and it was indeed impossible for an unorthodox blacksmith to have any casting techniques. In his opinion, Yi Guchen should be the kind of blacksmith who had some talent but no background, so it was normal that he did not have any casting techniques. Sigh, what a pity! 200,000 refined materials, but no casting techniques. Gong Sun Xiaoye shook her head regretfully. Shen Yuan sneered. So what if it was 200,000 refined materials? Without a casting technique, it was impossible to forge a good divine weapon just by relying on this kind of forging. During this time, the divine weapons forged by the other blacksmiths in the competition were also out. However, the quality of those divine weapons were mostly ordinary spiritual weapons, and the highest was only a supreme-grade spiritual weapon. There was a huge gap between Gongsun Xiaoye and Shintu Yuan's results. If there were no surprises, the winner of this blacksmith convention would undoubtedly be Gongsun Xiaoye. Little brother, you have already tried your best. Without casting techniques, it is very difficult to forge a divine weapon. If you join the Gongsun family, you may be able to obtain the Green Lotus Fire forging technique in the future. Gongsun Xianlong had a faint smile on his face. He asked himself, Yi Guchen should be tempted now that I've even taken out the Gongsun family's secret forging technique. Unfortunately, Yi Guchen was still indifferent. When the fire crystal, the 100-year cold heart jade, and the cloud marrow were about to merge together, the light in Yi Guchen's eyes under the bamboo hat suddenly became extremely sharp. At the same time, a terrifying transparent spiritual energy gushed out from Yi Guchen's sea of consciousness and directly seeped into the flame. Fire Soul Dual Casting. Yi Guchen shouted in his heart. His incomparably vigorous soul force controlled the flames and completely wrapped the materials together. This casting. All the blacksmiths who were watching the battle were shocked. Even if he had used the casting technique, they would not have been so shocked. However, Yi Guchen's casting technique was no weaker than the Green Lotus Fire casting technique of the Gongsun family. It might even be better. Even Gongsun Xianlong lost his composure as he stared blankly at Yi Guchen, who had just performed his forging technique. What kind of casting technique is this? Gongsun Xiaoye's rosy little mouth was wide open. In addition, Shintu Yuan, LV Qinghan, and the 3 people from the Xiao family were all staring at Yi Guchen. They had never seen such a casting technique before. At this moment, Yi Guchen's expression was focused. Fire Soul Dual Casting used spiritual energy to precisely control the flames and seep into every inch of the materials. This kind of forging technique had extremely high requirements for flames and soul power. In other words, even if this Fire Soul Dual Casting was given to Gongsun Xiaoye, Shintu Yuan, and the others, they would not be able to perform it. Only Yi Guchen, whose soul power was far beyond that of ordinary people, could use it. Along with the Fire Spirit Dual Casting, the 3 materials finally fused together perfectly and faintly transformed into a sword embryo. Boom! At the same time, an incomparably vigorous shockwave blasted the 5 transparent walls of Yi Guchen's casting room apart. An extremely resplendent light also shot out from the depths of the flames. It was as if a rare treasure had been born. That is. Gongsun Xianlong stared at the depths of the flame. It was as if he wanted to see the source of the brilliance. At this moment, Gongsun Xiaoye and Shintu Yuan were already speechless. They simply did not know what Yi Guchen had forged. This is not a shockwave that can be emitted by a piece of trash. Gongsun Xiaoye was inexplicably shocked and could not regain her senses for a moment. As for Shintu Yuan, he was even more frozen in place. His eyes were bloodshot as he stared at the depths of the flame. He did not believe it, nor did he want to believe it. Although he was dissatisfied that he had lost to Gongsun Xiaoye, he did not feel anything. After all, Gongsun Xiaoye was a famous forging genius. However, if he had lost to Yi Guchen, Shintu Yuan would definitely not accept it. He did not believe that he would lose to a person with an unknown identity who was hiding his head and showing his tail. I don't believe it, I definitely don't believe it. I want to see the finished product. At this moment, Shintu Yuan was still hoping for a fluke. As the shockwave dissipated, Yi Guchen also withdrew his spiritual energy and flames. A sword embryo landed in his hand. Yi Guchen did not fuse his spiritual seal into it, as there was no need to. Although this sword embryo was not a spiritual inscription divine weapon, it was better than one. At a glance, the sword embryo was 3 feet long, and it was surrounded by brilliance. The body of the sword looked like it was carved out of jade and crystal. The strangest thing was that the sword embryo was translucent. One could clearly see that there were 2 kinds of brilliance, one red and one icy blue, swirling within it like fish. Not to mention other things, just from its appearance alone, this sword embryo was far superior to other divine weapons. This sword embryo should be called a work of art. That is. Gongsun Xianlong looked at the sword embryo, his eyes slightly dazed. In his vague memory, he seemed to have seen this material in a dusty ancient book in his family. However, at this moment, he was so shocked that he could not recall it for a while. This kid's forging skills are really amazing. That sword embryo is so beautiful. One look and you can tell that it is not an ordinary item. The surrounding forging masters were all in awe. Gongsun Xiaoye looked suspiciously at the sword embryo in Yi Guqin's hand. Wasn't it said that the fire crystal and the 100-year cold heart jade clashed with each other and were difficult to fuse? Why was Yi Guqin able to fuse them, and it did not seem to be a waste? Not only was Gongsun Xiaoye suspicious, Shen Tuyuan was the first to stand up and say, "Kid, I don't care what special method you used, but a divine weapon is not just good-looking. Maybe your sword embryo looks good on the surface, but it is so weak that it can't even withstand a single blow?" Shen Tuyuan gritted his teeth, unwilling to let Yi Guqin steal the limelight. "What do you want?" Yi Guqin said indifferently. "Do you dare to compete with the divine weapon that I have forged?" Shen Tuyuan held the axe that he had forged with extreme confidence. Yi Guqin shook his head slightly and did not say anything else. In the next moment he held the sword embryo in his hand, poured his true qi into it, and then threw it out. Boom! An incomparably terrifying force of ice and fire spread out with a loud bang. That gorgeous sword embryo drew an afterimage, piercing through the air and emitting a violent screech. Shen Tuyuan's face was suddenly shocked, and he hurriedly blocked with the axe in his hand. Almost like cutting through tofu, the sword embryo directly cut the axe in half, and then flew out close to Shen Tuyuan's cheek. Finally, it made a turn and fell back into Yi Guqin's hand. "Is this enough?" An extremely calm voice came out from Yi Guqin's mouth. A bloody wound appeared on Shen Tuyuan's cheek, and a drop of blood seeped out. If that sword embryo had been just a little closer to his head, plop. The brush with death actually caused Shen Tuyuan's legs to go soft, and he directly knelt on the ground. Chapter 405. Silence. It was so quiet that one could hear the rapid breathing of some blacksmiths. At this moment, the entire gem-casting building had sunk into a strange, deathly silence. Then, there was a complete uproar. "Oh my God, he broke a divine weapon with spiritual inscriptions with one slash. This sword embryo is at least a superior grade divine weapon with spiritual inscriptions. No, it's not just that. This sword embryo has yet to be infused with a spiritual imprint, so it's not a divine weapon with spiritual inscriptions. It's hard to imagine. If it were infused with a spiritual imprint, it would probably become a supreme-grade divine weapon with spiritual inscriptions. I think this sword embryo has the foundation of a divine weapon with mystical inscriptions." All the blacksmiths were whispering to each other. The performance of Yi Guqin's sword embryo was too shocking. It was definitely a rare divine weapon. However, the most important thing was that the materials used by Yi Guqin were not only not of the highest quality, but also of conflicting attributes. To be able to use materials of conflicting attributes to forge such a divine weapon in the end, how many blacksmiths present could do that? Even the old blacksmiths were full of praises and felt ashamed of their inferiority. Shen Tuyuan, who was kneeling on the ground due to his weak legs, felt his mind go blank. The work that he was proud of after putting in so much effort was broken by Yi Guqin with one slash. Looking at the halved axe on the ground, Shen Tuyuan lost the ability to think. And Yi Guqin did not care about Shen Tuyuan at all. His tone was calm as he said to Gongsun Xiaoye, "Do you want to compete too?" "No need." Gongsun Xiaoye, who had a fiery personality like a little chili, stuttered as she replied. Even Shen Tuyuan's divine weapon had been broken by Yi Guqin with one slash. Even if the quality of the sword that she had forged was slightly better, it would not be much better. At this moment, if she still had doubts, she would be the only one losing face. "Young friend, can you let me take a look at this sword embryo?" Gongsun Xianlong asked after some hesitation. Generally speaking, any sword forged by a blacksmith, unless it was specially forged for others, would have the right to use it first. If the blacksmith was not willing, others would not even have the right to touch it. This was an internal rule in the smithing industry, so Gong Sun Xianlong probed. Furthermore, his tone had changed from junior and little brother to little friend. From this, one could see the change in his attitude. Without any hesitation, Yiguchen tossed the sword embryo to Gong Sun Xianlong. He didn't care about this sword embryo. Gong Sun Xianlong hurriedly rushed forward and raised his hands, as if he was holding a treasure. Even Gong Sun Xiaoye was dumbfounded by his attitude. When had she ever seen her father act so cautiously? Impossible. Could this be? Gong Sun Xuanlong's trembling hand brushed past the sword embryo. That kind of harmonious feeling made it hard to believe that it was formed by the fusion of two completely different materials. Smelly Dad, did you see anything? Gong Sun Xiaoye asked curiously. It was not only her. Everyone else present was also staring at Gong Sun Xianlong. It can't be wrong. I've seen it in an ancient book in my clan. The material of this sword embryo is called the Ice-Fire Mystic Heart Essence. Gong Sun Xianlong said in a trembling voice. Ice-Fire Mystic Heart Essence? What kind of material is that? Gong Sun Xiaoye was puzzled. The other smiths were the same. They didn't know what the Ice-Fire Mystic Heart Essence formed by the fusion of the fire crystal and the 100-year cold heart jade was. This Ice-Fire Mystic Heart Essence is a supreme material. It can even be used to forge tribulation divine weapons. Gong Sun Xianlong couldn't hide his excitement as he spoke. Everyone, including Gong Sun Xiaoye, was speechless. Even their breathing seemed to have stopped. They might not know the value of the Ice-Fire Mystic Heart Essence. However, they still knew the meaning of heavenly tribulation weapons. Tribulation divine weapons were above mystical rune divine weapons. There wasn't a single tribulation divine weapon in the entire Saint Origin dynasty. There was only one requirement to become a tribulation divine weapon, and that was to be able to withstand the baptism and tempering of tribulation divine weapons. One could imagine that a tribulation divine weapon that could withstand the bombardment of tribulation divine weapons was not something ordinary materials could compare to. And this Ice-Fire Mystic Heart Essence was a supreme material that could withstand the test of tribulation divine weapons. Tribulation divine weapon. Shen Tuyuan's mind shook. He was completely lost. No wonder his tribulation divine weapon had no resistance in front of this sword embryo. How could his spiritual rune divine weapon be compared to the materials used to forge tribulation divine weapons? There was no comparison at all. What kind of monster have I left behind? Shen Tuyuan roared in his heart. He recalled the scene where he had tried his best to persuade Yiguchen to stay. If he hadn't said so much back then, perhaps Yiguchen would have been pressured by the other smiths to leave. However, in the end, it was Shen Tuyuan himself who suppressed the voices of protest and asked Yiguchen to stay. Could there be anything more ironic than this? When Shen Tuyuan thought about it, he wanted to beat himself to death at that time. An unparalleled sense of regret exploded in Shen Tuyuan's heart, causing him to spit out a mouthful of blood. However, it was a pity that no one was paying attention to Shen Tuyuan, the loser. It's really the Ice-Fire Mystic Heart Essence. Little friend, how did you know about this fusion method? Gong Sun Xianlong lowered his stance completely and asked Yiguchen in a tone of asking for advice. I learned about it by accident, Yiguchen said lightly. He didn't want to reveal too much. Moreover, even if everyone here knew the secret of this fusion, they didn't have the heavenly sun mystic underworld fire and couldn't forge it for 200,000 times. Therefore, it was impossible to recreate the Ice-Fire Mystic Heart Essence. I was rude. Gong Sun Xianlong didn't mind at all and was extremely humble. Previously, he thought that Yiguchen would not turn back unless he hit a wall. Now that he thought about it, it was laughable. Even Gong Sun Xianlong felt ashamed that he had been taught a lesson by a junior. Can you announce the result? Yiguchen said calmly. His only goal was to repair the tribulation divine weapon with the snow clay embryo. Of course, Gong Sun Xiaoye said hesitantly. She glanced at Yiguchen from time to time and thought about how she looked at Yiguchen with disdain. She even wanted to tell him to leave. However, Yiguchen's behavior made her seem like a frog at the bottom of a well and short-sighted. Thinking of this, Gong Sun Xiaoye couldn't help but blush. Her shrewish personality was also restrained. Even Gongsun Xianlong treated Yiguchen courteously. She didn't have the right to scold Yiguchen. At this time, Gongsun Xianlong said to Yiguchen seriously, "Little friend, as the head of the Gongsun family, I strongly invite you to join the Gongsun family. If you join, you will be a core member of the Gongsun family." Gongsun Xianlong really didn't want to give up on Yiguchen, such a good piece of jade. Hearing Gongsun Xuanlong's words, all the blacksmiths present revealed envious gazes. The Gongsun family was a super family and a blacksmith family with abundant resources. It could be said that almost all the blacksmiths present wanted to join the Gongsun family, but they didn't have the right. "Little friend, if you join the Gongsun family, your future will be bright," the old blacksmith said with a sigh. Hearing this, Madame Xiao stood there in a daze, somewhat absent-minded. She couldn't believe that the lowly youth in her eyes had climbed up the social ladder and become a phoenix. His status had risen so quickly. Xiao Wanru's heart was filled with bitterness. A faint, self-deprecating smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. She could only be a lowly concubine. If Yi Guchen joined the Gongsun family and became a core member, his status wouldn't be lower than Shintamiao's. His status as a blacksmith would be even more precious. "I'm really stupid, but it's okay. In my heart, there's still someone. Whether it's young Master Yi or Shintamiao, they're far from being comparable. The Sword Master." Xiao Wanru clutched her chest. She could only comfort herself with the image of the Sword Master in her heart. At least this young Master Yi in front of her was far from the Sword Master in her heart. Thinking of this, Xiao Wanru felt slightly better. Chapter 406. The Gongsun family was not only a super family, but also a family of blacksmiths. It could be said that the status of a blacksmith was even higher than that of an ordinary martial artist. In order to obtain a suitable divine weapon, many experts were willing to become a blacksmith's hired thug. Therefore, the Gongsun family's foundation was even deeper than the average super family. Being invited by the Gongsun family and becoming a core member was definitely an opportunity that other blacksmiths could only dream of. The rest of the blacksmiths looked at Yi Guchen with envy in their eyes. Becoming a core member of the Gongsun family was like reaching the heavens in a single bound. However, Yi Guchen's expression was incomparably calm in the face of this opportunity that others could not even dream of. "I'm sorry. Thank you for your kind offer, family head Gongsun, but I have no such intention." Yi Guchen cupped his fists. What? Hearing Yi Guchen's words, all the blacksmiths doubted their ears. This young man with extraordinary talent in blacksmithing actually rejected the Gongsun family's invitation? Even Gongsun Xianlong had a faint look of astonishment on his face. Gongsun Xiaoye opened her eyes wide and looked at Yi Guchen as if she was looking at an idiot. She couldn't help but ask, "Hey, kid, do you know what kind of status the Gongsun family has in blacksmithing?" Gongsun Xianlong glared at Gongsun Xiaoye, then turned to Yi Guchen and said, "Xiaoye, don't be rude to our young friend." "My young friend, the Gongsun family is a family of blacksmiths. Given your amazing performance in blacksmithing, if you are trained by the Gongsun family, your future will be bright. It's not impossible for you to become a 4-star or even a 5-star blacksmith." Gongsun Xianlong said with a hint of passion in his voice. Gongsun Xianlong was unwilling to give up on a talent like Yi Guchen. When the surrounding blacksmiths heard this, their hearts pounded rapidly. A 5-star blacksmith, it was rare to see such a person in the Saint Origin dynasty. And if they really did appear, then no matter if it was the royal family or the 7 great forces, they would have to treat them with respect, not daring to slight them in the slightest. Now, Gongsun Xianlong said that Yi Guchen could become a 5-star blacksmith. How could this not be shocking? "This little brother, just where did you come from?" Xiao Lai's gaze was completely stunned. As for Madame Xiao and Xiao Wanru, their feelings were indescribable. On the other side, LV Qinghan's beautiful eyes revealed a strange light. She had never paid attention to Yi Guchen before, because with her status, it was indeed difficult for Yi Guchen to attract her attention. But now, even Gongsun Xianlong had made such a judgment. In LV Qinghan's heart, Yiguchen's position suddenly increased. A person with the potential to become a 5-star blacksmith was worth befriending. In the face of Gongsun Xuanlong's promise, Yiguchen's heart remained calm. Given his current situation, it was impossible for him to stay in the Gongsun family and learn forging in peace. Yiguchen pondered for a moment before replying, "Thank you for your kindness, Patriarch, but to be honest, I am only interested in forging. I don't specialize in it." "What do you mean, little friend?" Gongsun Xianlong was momentarily stunned. "What I mean is, I am not a blacksmith who specializes in forging. My main occupation is sword cultivation, and forging is just a hobby." Yiguchen had no choice but to speak the truth. This. Gongsun Xuanlong's eyes revealed a look of extreme shock. Not only him, but Gongsun Xiaoye and the other blacksmiths were also frozen in place, as if they had lost their souls. At first, no one thought highly of Yiguchen. Later, Yiguchen's 200,000 refinements shocked everyone. Then he fused the ice and fire mystic heart essence and cut Shinta Yuan's divine weapon in half. This made the blacksmith genius Gongsun Xiaoye speechless, and she could only admit defeat. But now, this young man actually said that forging was just a hobby and not his main occupation. He was actually a sword cultivator who practiced the sword? Wawa, you little brat, don't be so sarcastic. Gongsun Xiaoye was like an enraged tigress, baring her fangs and claws at Yiguchen, as if she wanted to bite Yiguchen. His words were really too hurtful. If Yiguchen, who had such an amazing performance in forging, only treated forging as a hobby, how could these blacksmiths, who specialized in forging but still lost to Yiguchen, accept this? At this moment, the other blacksmiths who participated in the competition were all short of breath, and lowered their heads in shame. Gongsun Xiaoye put her hands on her hips, panting with anger. As for Shinta Yuan, he was frozen in place, as if he had lost his soul. His body was like a piece of wood, and his heart was like dead ashes. His heart of forging had been completely shattered by Yiguchen. This meant that it would be difficult for Shinta Yuan to improve in forging in the future. It was no wonder that Shinta Yuan was like this. Even Gongsun Xianlong was almost emotionally unstable. Gongsun Xianlong coughed dryly, and could only say, "Young friend's words are really straightforward. Since I have already won, can I choose a treasure material?" "I need a snow clay fetus," Yiguchen said. "Yes, of course, I have it in my origin ring." Gongsun Xuanlong's origin ring flashed slightly, and a large snow clay fetus appeared. This snow clay fetus was like ice or snow, but its texture was soft, and it could merge with most metals to repair defects. "Many thanks." Yiguchen kept the snow clay fetus in his origin ring, and he gave the sword fetus to Gongsun Xianlong. Gongsun Xiaoye grabbed it in her hands, and loved it so much that she could not bear to part with it. "Many thanks, young friend." Gongsun Xianlong could not suppress his joy. Even he did not expect that Yiguchen would give him such a precious sword fetus of the Ice-Fire Mystic Heart Essence. Yiguchen did not care. He already had the Xianming Heavy Sword and the Blood Prison Sword, and did not need this sword fetus. He might as well give it to the Gongsun family and form a good relationship. Yiguchen did not want to stay any longer, and was about to leave. But at this moment, LV Qinghan walked lightly and landed in front of Yiguchen. Yiguchen stopped in his tracks and looked at the person who had come. The woman in front of him was dressed in white, like a snow lotus, and there was a trace of classical beauty in her coldness. At the same time, the aura that was faintly emitted from her body made Yiguchen frown slightly. The woman in front of him was a talented girl with extraordinary strength. "Young master, would you do me the honor of coming to House Yunyan? Qinghan would like to invite you to a banquet." LV Qinghan's tone was as calm as water. Yiguchen's eyes were slightly surprised. The woman in front of him was the top genius of Consonance Palace, LV Qinghan, who was on par with the young war emperor and the others. "Hey, senior sister LV, although you're a senior sister, you can't poach him like this." Gongsun Xiaoye jumped over and said with her cheeks puffed up. It seemed that Yiguchen was being fought over by the two beauties. Envy appeared in the eyes of all the surrounding men. Not everyone had the qualifications to enjoy such treatment. However, when this scene entered Xiao Wanru's eyes, she felt that it was extremely dazzling. Wanru, don't mind him. As long as he doesn't join the Gongsun family, he won't be as good as you. Madame Xiao comforted her. But Xiao Wanru did not listen to Madame Xiao anymore. I still have something to do, so let's forget about it. But I think we'll meet again soon. Yi Guchen looked deeply at LV Qinghan. LV Qinghan would naturally be present at the Seven Forces exchange, so they could indeed meet again. Yi Guchen cupped his fists and left the Gem Forge building alone. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.